services and infrastructure for our community in Dublin Midwest, but also for communities all over Ireland, because I feel very strongly that, you know, if we have good public services and infrastructure, it benefits everybody in society. And also I feel very strongly about the need to reduce poverty and income inequality, because I think those issues, they affect everybody and they're bad for our society in terms of our mental health, you know, and life expectancy and things like that. So it's very important that we, you know, reduce the gap in incomes and invest more in public services like education and public transport and benefit everybody in our society.
I got involved in politics to make a difference, to help other people and to represent my community. I've done that through the years, through volunteering in Scouts, the GA, helping out in community groups. Now I want to do that in the Dáil. I believe that we need somebody like a Labour candidate who has the Labour values to represent Cork North Central at Dáil Éireann. We haven't had one for the past couple of years, and now I think it's time that we get a Labour voice back representing the people of Cork North Central.
I believe in a strong and fighting Labour Party. A Labour Party that's not just going to make up the numbers, but will make a difference. A Labour Party to deliver real solutions, real Labour.
Conference, you already know that we have four of the finest candidates the Labour Party has ever presented in the 4 by-elections that will happen on the 29th of this month. From Duncan down to Wexford, we have George. From Joanna to Cork, where we have John Marr. 4 fantastic candidates, people who are already embedded in their communities, known by their communities, elected councillors working on the ground. They are the best. They deserve to win, but they'll only win with your support, your help. Knock on the doors, talk to your neighbours, rally to them, even if you're not from those constituencies, because this will be a real test for us. I believe a test we will pass with flying colours. They're worth your support, they're worth your effort, but we need to give it to them 100%. Campaign for Labour, get 4 victories on the 29th of November.
Okay, Niall, here you go now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You happy? Are you happy? The which? Oh no, that's our own one. That's our own one. Yeah, go ahead, Niall. Check.
What a question. Are you happy? Who could be happy living in Ireland under the dictatorship of Fine Gael and a few right-wing independents? Good morning, comrades and friends. I want to welcome you to Mullingar for Conference 2019. Our conference is taking place against the background of the unfolding dynamic tragedy of Brexit, with all its long-term implications for the people of Ireland, of the UK, and indeed of Europe as well. But despite this tragedy, we are living in a moment of immense opportunity here in Ireland. We're enjoying the most sustained growth of virtually any other economy in Europe for 5 years running. And we're living in one of the 10 richest countries in the world. And as well as that, delegates, we have probably the best or nearly the best demographic profile in all of Europe. And thus it is a moment of immense opportunity because we have the capacity to address the scourge of income inequality. We have the capacity to solve the housing crisis. We have the capacity to rebuild our public health and education services and to provide childcare to a level equal to the best in Europe. and we have the capacity now to undertake the transition to a zero carbon emissions economy in a reasonable period of time. But of course, as we all know in this room, those objectives will not be achieved by the leave it to the market approach, to which both Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil are wedded at the hip. We need in this country, as we all know, a fundamental strategic shift to tackle economic inequality. And that is why this party and our party leader, Brendan Howlin, set out very clearly on the 8th of September that we will not support by way of participation in or otherwise any administration after the next general election unless it commits to legislate to extend the right to trade union representation in their place of work for everyone who wants to avail of it. Unless it undertakes to address the housing crisis, and we have set out in a comprehensive policy document the way that crisis can be addressed over a 5-year period without increasing taxation by 1 single cent. And unless it commits to a number of feasible and affordable and realisable steps towards the achievement of the rebuilding of our public health service, our education system, with a particular focus on early childhood education, and unless it sets out a course to the realisation of the zero carbon emission economy via a just transition over a reasonable period of time. And whereas it has not been afforded that much appreciation, our party, Connolly's party, the Labour Party, is the only political party in this state that has set out clear and absolute bottom lines for our support for any future administration. And we are making it very, very clear that we will not participate or otherwise support any future administration unless these bottom lines are met. And that is the clear message, delegates, that our candidates will be taking to the electorate in the forthcoming by-elections. That is the message which George Lawlor will be taking in Wexford. That is the message which John Marr will be taking in Cork North Central. That is the message that Joanna Tuffy will be taking in Dublin Mid-West. And that is the message that Duncan Smith will be taking to the electorate in Dublin Fingal. They are, as Brendan has said earlier, fine candidates, and they are deserving of all our support and our most earnest efforts. And because, delegates, we recognise that these objectives which we have set out, although totally realisable, cannot be achieved by the Labour Party alone, we have committed to ask our supporters to transfer to the other progressive parties, to the Social Democrats and to the Green Party in the forthcoming elections. And we do so in recognition of the fact that the left in Ireland has an obligation to present a cohesive, coherent, achievable policy platform and to set out a roadmap towards achieving it, to win the allegiance and the support of the electorate, and we cannot do it on our own. And I believe as well, personally, that that commitment to call for transfers, even though it has not been reciprocated yet, should be extended to others who share our vision of an egalitarian Ireland which is entirely achievable in the context of the resources which are currently available. Because as long as we indulge in playing politics and one-upmanship on the left, we will not make progress. And unless we make progress, the unnecessary suffering will continue. And we have to be brave, because we are the custodians of the legacy of Connolly, who was as brave as we know as they come. So I invite you to an interesting day in developing our policies, for which a lot of effort has gone into by the Policy Committee under the chairmanship of my predecessor, Lorraine Mulligan. And I want, without further ado, to declare our conference open and to invite our candidate here in Westmeath, Alan Mangan, to address you. Thank you, delegates.
Thank you, Jack. Good morning, fellow delegates. On behalf of the Longford Westmeath Labour Party, I want to thank you for coming here to the National Labour Conference here in Mullingar. But I hope to see you again next year when we host the Flack Yolna Hearing. I know you have come from all parts of the island to make it here this morning, and I know that today's conference will be a much richer conference for your presence. As your general election candidate for Longford Westmeath, it is my pleasure to welcome you here, as the man who is seeking to replace the great Willie Penrose. As Willie Penrose has served this constituency and the Labour Party with distinction since the age of 13 as branch secretary, as county councillor since 1985, and as TD in this area from 1992 to the present day. His lifetime in the public service has been one of dedication, honesty, huge energy, endless compassion, and a drive to look after the real needs of the people. His connection with the people in this area, whether it's through agriculture, sport, politics, the cares, community development, or music, has always meant that there's a set of ears always willing to hear, and one set of arms and legs as willing to do something about it. His sharp mind, photographic memory, and huge heart meant Willie Penrose was someone you could always rely on. If he could do it for you, he would. If it was not possible, he would tell you the truth. I am delighted that this year, as he bids farewell as RTD and former minister, that as vice chair of Longford, or as Westmeath Ceoltas Committee, the Fleadh is coming home to Mullingar, and as a proud native of Ballycarrigy, whom were recently crowned junior football champions in Westmeath. We won't let you forget that one. Willie, you will always be missed, but we know you'll always be here. Thanks very much. We gather today at a time of extreme challenge for our nation in terms of affordable housing, health, transport, environment, but Labour has never shrunk away from a challenge. And in fact, we've always been front and centre when the heavy lifting is needed. We have 170 years been there to support the low-paid worker, the carer, the small business owner, or the homeless. We have focused on supporting community projects, education in all forms, and above all, creating a fair and equal society. As we gather in Mullingar today, there are many people in this town and in this region who suffer from the massive lack of investment in rural Ireland. This discrimination has meant that the lack of housing and employment, an inability to live in rural locations, cuts in garden numbers, schools, transport options, and support for small businesses. It has meant that a lack for carers, people suffering from addiction, mental health issues, and those who have come to our country seeking refuge. These issues and others will be our focus here this morning. We hope that everyone leaves here today invigorated and mindful of the task that we have to offer a real alternative to the new I step out and you step in politics of the two major parties, the lack of real alternatives or solutions offered by Sinn Féin or the other oppose everything parties. We are not about collecting votes on false promises, but about building a fair and just society, the real costed policies. And we are offering ourselves to the Irish electorate as a responsible party with a real vision for the fair and equal Ireland. We are asking Irish people to support our by-election candidates, and I particularly welcome the four of them here today. But I also support that each of us will support everyone that's going to be hitting the ballot papers next spring. In Labour, we offer hope, solutions, a transparent plan to solve the housing, health and environmental crisis. We want climate action, but also a just transition. We want jobs in the area that limit our carbon footprint. We want essential infrastructure, but we will not be signing blank cheques like the National Children's Hospital. We want a clean water available to everyone, but we want to conserve it. We want a tax system that stimulates employment, but does not starve essential government services. We are about responsible politics. We tell the truth. I feel that what can be more important than a clean and safe environment, a health service that we can depend on, and a roof over our heads, and a real chance to support ourselves and our families. Over 300,000 carers in Ireland need our voice. Thousands without a home need our voice. Hundreds on trolleys around the country every day need our voice. Those who suffer from addiction, poor mental health, need our voice. Those who cannot access education need our voice. Those who lack affordable childcare, meaningful employment and essential services need our voice. The voice of the people who care has been Labour for 107 years. Here in Mullingar today, we must make that voice be heard. Thanks very much, everyone. Welcome to Mullingar. Enjoy your day.
Well, comrades and friends, it's great to be here back in Mullingar for another Labour conference. Always a great buzz to be here with so many members, with so many fellow delegates and with so many invited guests among us. I just want to thank Jack and Will and Alan. I nearly said Willie Penrose. That just shows you how ingrained it is here in Mullingar. But to thank Jack and Alan for the great warm-up for my warm-up. And I am merely the warm-up act for the live TV 2 hours of coverage in which you will hear from Labour spokespersons, from some of our wonderful 57 councillors, and from our invited guests this morning. We have over 40 people taking part in 6 panels over the 2-hour period. This is live TV, and in the week when we lost the late and very sadly lamented Gay Byrne, he made live TV look easy, but there is in fact a huge team of people behind making this 2-hour session work. I just want to, on your behalf, invite a round of applause for Mags, for Billy, for Brian, and for all the great team. And in great Labour tradition, it's a team that is dominated, I'm told, by women. No surprises there. So we're particularly glad that so many of you are here for this morning's session, to hear the debates, to hear the discussion, to hear our spokespeople and to hear our invited guests. We're particularly grateful to those of you who've taken time out from the 4 by-election campaigns, and just again a shout out to our 4 amazing by-election candidates, Joanna, John, George and Duncan. Well done to all of you for standing for the party. And I know all of us are going to be working night and day to ensure that we get 4 great by-election candidates elected on the 29th of November. We're also, of course, going to be working towards the general election. And in the general election, as you've heard from Alan and from Jack, Labour will be standing on 5 key policy areas. On jobs, and we're the party of the trade union movement. We have a long track record on delivering progressive change on jobs. On healthcare, we have a long track record of standing on for universal healthcare at a time when it was neither popular, but it was certainly not popular. And we're pushing now with our spokesperson Alan Kelly on Sláinte Care, and we're pushing for a decent healthcare system for all. We're pushing for housing, and Eleanor Sullivan has been hugely influential on pushing for a strong housing programme. Labour has the best housing policy of any party. We have a deliverable housing policy that can end the scourge of homelessness in this country. And we have a policy on climate change. And Labour is a party that has always led on green issues. We were the first party to push forward on private members' legislation on climate change. We delivered on climate protection legislation when in government. And we know how important a just transition is for all of us and for our children and our grandchildren's future. And finally, we're standing on a fair start for every child. We're signed up to the No Child 2020 principles, and we believe that we need to be resourcing childcare, resourcing education, resourcing a fair start and an equal start for every child. So these are the themes that we're going to be building on across the 6 panels this morning. You're going to be hearing, as I said, from a large range of people, and we're particularly delighted that we're not just having Labour spokespeople, that we also have invited guests. That's in keeping with our long tradition of standing for intersectional equality, for realising that equality needs a progressive alliance of people working together. If we're serious about building an equal society, we must work with like-minded people in other parties, people in civil society, representatives of NGOs, and we're delighted that we're going to have that diverse spectrum represented here this morning at the party. This is the way forward for building an equal society in Ireland, and Labour has always been to the forefront of that movement for equality. We have always been to the forefront, whether it's on women's rights, on LGBT rights, on workers' rights, on trade union rights and the right to collective bargaining in Ireland, which is a key platform, as you heard from Jack, or whether it's on climate change or on children's rights or on rights of persons with disabilities. We have led on these issues over so many years and on so many issues. And we are, as Alan has said, a party that is responsible about delivering change. We don't just stand for change. We don't just stand for equality and for progressive issues. We also have a track record of delivering on these issues, and we're going to continue to do so and continue to press our programme of progressive values, our programme of seeking support for an equal Ireland, and we're going to do that over the coming months. We thought it might only be a few days to the general election at one point last week, but we now know it's likely to be months to the general election. So we're going to be building on our Labour platform as we go into the by-election campaign on 29th November, and we're going to be building on it as we go into the general election campaign, and we'll be ready for that whenever it may be. And I'm honoured to be the chair of the General Election Committee, so we'll be working with all of you, with our great candidates, with our councillors, with our parliamentary party, to ensure that we have a really good team and a really good message and a really good performance in next year's general election. Now, as you know, I am the warm-up act. I understand we're about to go on to the live coverage, so I am about to hand over to Mags Murphy, who is our incomparable MC for this morning, along with Aoife Sullivan on the other side, and they, as you've heard, will have about 40 people over the 2-hour period, and I hope you will all stay to hear what's going to be a really stimulating, a really fascinating discussion on building an
Just to remind you all again, we are streaming live on labour.ie, so please do, if you have anybody at home who'd like to watch, please do tell them. We also have 2 panels. Aoife Sullivan and myself will be talking to people inside the party about our own policies, to people outside our organisation about their policies and what we should put front and centre if we truly want to build an Ireland that is an equal society. And just also to remind you that we have a hashtag today, which is LP19, so please do join in on that. Now we're going to go to the conference floor for the first time this morning, and Eleanor Sullivan, who is the chair of Labour Women, and she is also the primary school teacher. Ellen, if you could stand to the podium, please, and introduce our first panel.
If we are to have an equal society, it must start with children so that no child is left behind. I'm a teacher, and one thing I can tell you is that the cost parents have to meet each school year is much too high. Labour has a plan to tackle these costs and make primary education genuinely free of charge, with free school books and an end to voluntary contributions. We also want the provision of hot school meals to help end the situation where any child in this country goes hungry or malnourished. Labour knows that childcare is too expensive in Ireland, and too many workers in this predominantly female sector are paid less than the living wage. We need to support parents who shouldn't have to choose between a family and a career. Labour has a plan for a pilot programme of public preschool education in the most disadvantaged areas to allow parents to seek work, education or training, and to ensure that a generation of children is not left behind.
Thank you, Ellen. And on stage beside me today, I have Sean Sherlock, TD, Cork East, and for this occasion, spokesperson on Children and Youth Affairs. I have Councillor Deirdre Kingston, our Dunleary councillor, and she's also our spokesperson on equality. Dr. Amy Greer-Murphy, no relation, a social scientist, and Donna Vuma, who is from the Movement of Asylum Seekers in Ireland and the policy officer with Doris Limney. You're all very welcome. Sean, if I can dip into what Ellen was saying there, her comments, like, what can we do more to ensure that this childcare system works for everyone?
Well, I think we need to start by ensuring that people who work within the early years sector or the childcare sector get a fair day's wages for the work that they do. And right now, and it has been referred to already, there is a situation where people are working long hours for very low pay. And it is our clear demand that, the Big Start campaign, forwarded by SIP2, needs to be supported, and we need what they call a sectoral employment order for the sector, so that the people working within the sector, that there's a recognition of the work that they do, that the qualifications that they have is recognised, and that they get a commensurate salary to go with their qualifications. Until we get to that point, it's going to be a very informal sector, and there's going to be a high rate of attrition. So parents, families need to have that security of ensuring, of knowing that people who work within the sector are getting a fair day's pay for the job that they do, and that you encourage more people into the sector and you discourage the rates of attrition that are there already.
Donna Vuma, in your experience, is there an equal society? Is there an equal opportunity for all?
Unfortunately, from my experience, it's not very equal. I mean, we know that for many migrants, refugees and asylum seekers, most of the time their stay or their residency in the country is often determined by them being active in the workplace. And unfortunately, you need childcare to be able to effectively engage in the workplace. With the right to work that was recently introduced for asylum seekers, there's been a very huge willingness for people to get involved in the workplace and going back to school. But we find that for many parents living, for example, in the direct provision centres on an income of €38 with no entitlement to other social welfare benefits or the child benefit even, it becomes extremely expensive or impossible for them to even meet childcare costs. This is also a common factor for people who find themselves in emergency accommodation, but for, like I say, the migrant groups that are also in emergency accommodation, it's very hard, it's very difficult for them to be able to access childcare services.
I'll come back and you can put to our people here, our policymakers, what we can do to help alleviate that. But Deirdre, first of all, Cogorgadas.
Thank you.
Baby number 2, as a local councillor as well in Dunleary. What are the kind of issues that are coming up for you in relation to childcare?
Well, I think with childcare, we're facing a massive issue in childcare in this country, and the main issues that I can see, as Sean talked about, is the pay and conditions of the workers, who, can I say, are absolute heroes. They have an incredibly hard job, and they always have a smile on their face every time I collect my son from creche. The cost is a massive barrier for families. It's crippling families that are paying very high rents, particularly in Dublin and urban areas, and mortgages as well. And the availability of places is another huge area of stress for parents, I think, when it's coming to their child starting creche. At the moment, we have a system where we're getting subsidy from the government, which it's really a drop in the ocean. I mean, it's being absorbed by the private providers of childcare, really, and it's not making a huge difference at all. You have a situation where we had a report recently where we're seeing that a lot of women are actually, not going back to work. They want to go back to work on a part-time or full-time basis, but they can't because they can't afford the childcare. So they're making that decision on the basis of these high costs. So I think we need to look at a system where the state is taking a much greater role in the provision of childcare, and that we can have much more accountability, and that we can provide greater conditions for the staff.
Amy, you were involved in a lot of research with SIP2's Big Start campaign, and just to echo what Sean said, it's a wonderful campaign that's been run across the country. And your research was carried out on the experiences of early years professionals. So tell me about your findings.
Yeah. So we surveyed 3,200 early years professionals, which is about 12% of the total people employed in the sector. And we looked into their experiences and expectations of working in the sector, and unfortunately they were overwhelmingly very negative. Now, in spite of the fact that everyone said they were very passionate about working with children and they loved their job, the reality was that their day-to-day work was very difficult. 98% felt that their wages were simply too low. They cited low pay, a lack of recognition by society, and stress in their day-to-day job as significant factors for them. The financial implications of the low pay were significant. 84% said that they would be unable to meet unexpected expenses, for example. And unfortunately, 90% of those surveyed said that they would consider leaving the sector within 5 years if conditions didn't improve.
And they're a very highly educated group of people as well.
Yes, so 94% of those working in the sector have some formal qualification. Many have undergraduate degrees or postgraduate degrees, but unfortunately, because the pay is too low and the conditions are often very insecure or precarious, there just isn't enough keeping them in the job in the long term.
Sean, you're also a parent, and I mean, do you hear the same kind of issues coming up in Cork East?
I do. I mean, throughout the country, Mags, you have a situation now where people are paying the equivalent of a second mortgage on childcare. Now, how did we arrive in a situation in this country where that is the case? And I think we need to start having a serious conversation in this country about whether we really want to have a fit-for-purpose early years childcare system. And to my mind, I'm beginning to think that we need to start to have the national conversation now to put it on a proper statutory footing and to have it such that it's the same as primary school education and post-primary school education, and that the state begins to intervene. Because I don't think it's enough that we have a situation where you have the grants or the subsidies, because there will always be exceptions to people who won't benefit, and it's not a fully equal equality doesn't exist in such a system. So I think we really need to start having the conversation about what it means for every child. And if we're talking about every child being treated equally, then I think we need to start funding, we need to start examining or having something like a citizens' assembly around the idea, for instance, of what does the future of preschool early years look like. Because let the people then decide and let the people come up with ideas. And I think that's one way forward.
And Donna, then just to come back to you on some of the issues that have been raised here. A lot of them will be around access as well. Right. What can you say to our policymakers and our party members in this room today about your help?
Right, I think the policies need to change to reflect the Children's First policy and the Children's Right Act, because at the moment, migrant children, specifically refugees and asylum-seeker children, are heavily excluded. I know that later you'll be talking about direct provision, because a lot of issues are centered around how the centers are very isolated, the direct provision centers are very isolated, very segregated from the local communities, which means that those particular groups of those children are automatically excluded before we even talk about accessing the benefits or the schemes that were mentioned here in relation to childcare and education. It's an added burden on the parents, but more so on the children, because they do feel that discrimination, and that affects, obviously, the adults that they grow up to be. So that needs to really change.
Amy, what happens if we do lose a lot of these wonderfully educated childcare providers?
Well, obviously, for the workers themselves, it creates a lot of strain. You know, they're going back into the labour market, maybe they're retraining in something else entirely. But the reality is for the young children, and this is a conversation about the children that are in their care. It's very disruptive for young children to have constantly new staff coming on site. They're trying to forge relationships with those caregivers and those educators. So it's very disruptive for the children that are in their care.
And Deirdre, expecting baby number 2, as I said, congratulations. Anything else that we can say to people within your constituency around our policy?
Well, I think it's about people taking this issue now and really campaigning for a change fundamentally in the way we do things. And it's like Donna said, I mean, we passed a referendum that we were to put children's rights at the centre of everything we do. That's not happening in the childcare sector at all, and it's affecting every element of it. So I think we need to look at more investment in community childcare facilities, which are operating really well in certain areas of the country. And I think our focus needs to be more on that community investment rather than on the private operators.
And just to say, we are taking tweets. Aoife will be coming to them shortly as well. So if you're following us on labour.ie, again, the hashtag is LP19. Sean, back to the workers again. A lot of them are your neighbours in Mallow and beyond in Cork East. What else can we say to them this morning?
Well, I now have a situation, and I'm sure other people have experienced this as well, where people who are working within the sector were looking at the recent budget announcement in respect of the increase in the number of SNAs that are to be allocated. And many people who are working in the sector are now thinking of applying to become SNAs. Such is the precariousness of the employment that they're in. So the Minister herself, Catherine Zappone, has said that she is in favour of a sectoral employment order which would actually strike a fair rate for the job. So if the Minister herself is in favour of it, and if the target in terms of the number of people who are involved in the sector is reached in terms of seeking that, going through the process of seeking the sectoral employment order, that's basically a formal order that says there is a going rate for the job that you do. Well, then I think the government needs to be more proactive in terms of, bringing the people in, getting them signed up and saying, no, we're going to formally negotiate the sectoral employment order. I think that would give confidence to a lot of those workers who are deciding maybe, in spite of the vast qualifications that they have, because they're up to level 7, level 8, level 9 and so on, and highly qualified, highly professional people who are saying, well, where is the future for me in this sector? So the government needs to step in, and if you give a fair rate for the job, commensurate with the recognition of your qualifications, then I think you can begin to kind of stem the flow away from the sector.
Don, I want to come back to you before we kick it over to Aoife and her panel. We are going to be talking about direct provision later on in our panel discussions. Can you tell me, how have you been treated?
That's a very difficult question to answer. I've been in the system myself, the direct provision system, for the last 5 years. I'm obviously being forced to raise 3 children in a state of poverty. That is absolutely not fair on these children. So no children should have to grow up in that condition, whether it's asylum seeker children or citizens of Ireland who are living in emergency accommodations, similar situations to that of direct provision. So
you can feel the change of energy in the room with that. So thank you. Thank you for your contribution. I do appreciate it. So I'm sure there's lots more that we could discuss here, but we are limited on time. Again, labour.ie, we're streaming live, and I'm going to go over now to Aoife Hulawan. Do you agree?
Míle buíochas, Mags. Deirdre spoke there a minute ago about the heroes of early years, and right beside me is my hero of early years, Jessica Lee. Jessica's a provider in Dublin, and she's also a lecturer in early years. So Jessica, you know firsthand the issues around funding.
Yes, so many amazing points were raised by Mag's panel over there, but the essence of it for us at the moment is the DCYA, their narrative over the last few years has been around 2 things, really. High quality for children and affordability for parents, but we're forced into a position at the moment where neither of those things are achievable. And they're very interlinked, along with what Sean Sherlock said about the wages and conditions. There is a situation at the moment where services across the country are closing. Services can't keep their doors open and can't keep staff. As a result, parents have to leave their jobs, leave the labour force to stay at home. Even if they can access services that are open, they can't afford the fees. And basically, the most ironic part of all of this is staff in early years services can't afford to put their own children in these very services. Basically, most early years workers across the country are on 38-week contracts. They sign on to job seekers during the summer, despite being fully employed. They could have 40-odd years experience, as was mentioned. They could have degree, master's level qualifications. But despite the fact that they're on job seekers during the summer, they're still working 60-hour weeks during the summer, doing compliance, admin, recruitment, planning, everything around that. Yet,
Sean mentioned earlier the attrition issues. I mean, keeping staff. I know that you had some difficulties yourself this year.
I did. We were trying to fill a number of positions this year. It took me 4 months to fill one of them, and we only got to the end point of that process 2 days before we were due to open for new term. So I was terrified of letting down 100 and odd families that had registered for one of our services. So it affects everyone. It's affecting the children, the families, the workers, and the providers. We have in our sector women and men, I suppose, in a small minority, unfortunately, who could be 40 years in the sector, and they would have a 17-year-old child working in retail who is earning more than them, which is a bit of a disgrace. My other hat that you mentioned is I work with students in universities studying for their degree in early childhood education, and what I'm seeing more and more every year now is those students, before they even graduate, before they even get to final year, have already decided they're leaving the sector. So we're training up these people. Minister's opponent is talking about the statistics of graduates we're getting, and yes, we are getting them. But what's not reflected in those statistics is that they're actually leaving. They're leaving the sector entirely. They're working for banks, they're working for legal. They could be going into primary school. So I suppose my message today is I want to first of all invite parents, in relation to your fees, have that conversation with your early years providers rather than pitting provider against parent. We want parents and providers to unite, to lobby politicians, to fight for what is required, because fees cannot be lowered, otherwise we lose more staff. They're already on minimum wage. And the other invitation I want is for workers, staff, educators and providers to please look up our Big Start campaign in SIP2 and join it. As Sean Sherlock mentioned earlier, the only way we're going to get a pay scale in place is with a sectoral employment order, and the only way to do that is through SIP2 and our Big Start campaign.
Jessica, thank you. Thank you so much, Jessica. On the talk about graduates and graduates staying or leaving in the sector, Councillor Michelle Hall, you've recently completed your BA in Applied Childhood Studies. Are graduates going to stay in the sector? What's happening?
No, unfortunately they're not. I mean, the women that I studied with, they're looking to further their careers, and that really is talking about less contact hours with children. And unfortunately, that means less professionalisation of the sector too. I'm a special needs assistant, and just like Sean did mention, a lot of our workers are actually childhood graduates, so they see coming into primary school as more lucrative. And this is a huge issue because we have those early years, which I've discovered now from studying early childhood, are the most crucial in our children's lives. Those 0 to 6 years, and we have a whole of government policy, this new First 5 policy, which Catherine Sapone has brought out. But I mean, how can we implement it if we don't have the childcare workers there? I mean, you're looking at the cognitive development, and I think we need to talk about homelessness as well, where we have this causes trauma and adverse childhood experiences in children, and that affects their neural pathways and their development. And we as professionals need to be able to work with those children as well to make them into people that can work in society as well.
So this issues with recruitment and attrition, as Amy was mentioning, the constant changeover of staff, that's having actually a detrimental effect on the children in this care and education service.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you need you need that one-on-one with the child, building the relationships. I mean, you know yourself, Jessica, building the relationship with child, but sure, how can you if you're constantly moving and then you're constantly stressed in work? I mean, there's so much compliance. In fact, some of our graduates will probably move into compliance managers, and again, that's less time with children. And I think you're right, we need to get childcare workers to sign up to the unions so we can get the sectoral order, we can be on par primary school teachers, and we can be respected. And I think that's one of the key things, that we're not really respected. And I think parents respect us. They understand how crucial that sector is, but we need the government to really act on that.
Thank you, Michelle. And Ciara, you're a parent, so I suppose you can speak to us about the worries that parents have in terms of the quality. And Jessica gave a very nice call out to the parents there. I suppose what else can parents do to support this campaign, to get on board? How can we resolve this issue?
Yes, I am a parent. My daughter is 10 months old, so we're just kind of getting into that area now where we're looking for childcare for her. So what can parents do? We need to make it. I'm also a counsellor in North Kildare, so I do hear this a lot. This is a very big issue in my area because we have quite a young population. So as parents, what we can do is we need to make this a big election issue. We need to, when the local candidate knocks on your door and says, hello, I'm so-and-so, I'm looking for your vote, and they say, what can I do for you? And you're halfway through dinner and the child's running around screaming and you can't think what you want to bring up with them. Just right beside your door, put it on a piece of paper, ask them about childcare. What are you going to do? How much money are you going to put into childcare? Because really, as a parent, the issues are affordability. That's the top one. It is as a parent, that's the top one. But you also want availability of childcare, and there's a huge problem in my own area of Selbridge where it's very difficult to get a child into a creche because there's just not enough spaces. And then the third one is, of course, you want quality childcare because you don't want to leave your child with just anybody. You want to make sure they're getting a really good start in life, and to make sure that happens, you need consistency of care, and you cannot have consistency of care while there's such a huge turnover in the sector. And there will continue to be a huge turnover in the sector until the low wages and the precarious work in the sector are addressed, and for that we need more state investment. And it's a really good investment for the state to make, because if you put money into early years education, it's actually saving the state money in the long run, because those years are so crucial for development.
And Ciara, you're a newly elected councillor. On the campaign trail, is this an issue that was coming up? Were parents talking to you about this on the doorstep?
Not as much as they should have been.
Really?
Yeah, really.
Okay.
Now, it did bring up occasionally, but I think people are kind of like, oh, what can we do? You know, they're trying to get along with life. But I'm completely serious here. You need to bring it up with every politician who comes to your door.
Okay, so parents, there's a message for you there. Back over to Mags. Thank you.
Míle buíochas, Aoife. We're next moving on, changing our focus slightly onto different issues facing young people around mental health supports, the growing campaign around decriminalisation of drugs, women's participation in education, and a campaign around some of the busiest people and often most forgotten people in schools. Conference, please welcome to the floor our general election candidate for Sligo Leitrim, Nessa Cosgrove.
We need to take a compassionate approach to people who are addicted to drugs by finding them ways to help them to overcome their addiction, by removing any barriers for them in accessing help. No parent should be afraid to look for medical help for their child due to the fear of their child might get a criminal record. We've spent way too long talking about this, but nothing has really changed. Labour instead wants to decriminalise the person who is addicted to drugs. If someone is found in possession of any illegal drug for personal use, we think that they shouldn't be criminalised, rather they should be helped and treated. In countries where decriminalisation of the user has been implemented, in Portugal for example, we've seen a fall in overdose deaths, drug-related crimes, problematic drug use, and a reduction in the number of people sent to jail for possession. This cultural shift took many years to happen, but the successes are evident and real. As a youth worker, I can see how this issue is linked to both our educational system and our mental health system. Too many young people are left behind by our current systems and never get the opportunity to succeed in life. The mental health services that we have in this country at the moment are simply not fit for purpose, which means that children and young people are not being cared for in the way that they should be and the way that they deserve to be.
Thank you, Nessa, and best of luck. Joining me on the panel now, as you can see, Senator Jed Nash, spokesperson on employment and social protection, Councillor Rebecca Moynihan, who is spokesperson on community arts, and also our general election candidate in Dublin South Central. Moving west, Councillor Neil McNeilis, our general election candidate in Galway West, spokesperson on tourism, and also the chair of Let's Get Talking. And finally, Laura Harmon, a wonderful friend of ours, also working for the National Women's Council of Ireland. Rebecca, just in relation to a recent experience you had around a campaign to reject supervised injecting centre in your area, where's our compassion in relation to this?
Well, I think there was a number of kind of schools and community groups in the area that raised concerns And the concerns would be somewhat unfounded based on their previous experience. What you were going to have is a medical, humane approach, and it would actually probably take drug dealing and antisocial behaviour off the streets around that school. I think I understand the emotional reaction and the uncomfortableness to a change in policy along the lines of something like this, but when you actually look at the evidence, you realise that it makes it safer for the user, it makes it safer for communities, and we really need to take the issue of drugs out of the criminal justice system the way that it is. Like I'm seeing situations in my area where you have teenagers that are getting really early involved in the drugs trade and they're getting involved in gangs. That shouldn't be happening. And as Nessa spoke about the experience of Portugal, I think there were a lot of the same fears around the initial decriminalisation of drugs in Portugal, and there might have been an increase in drug usage generally very soon afterwards, but then that managed to massage itself out of time. And I think we have to have a rethink of our whole drugs policy within this country, because so many young teenagers are falling into the organised criminal system, are falling into drugs. We're going to be talking about mental health services later on, which is a cause and effect of that. But the medically supervised injection centres are something that's going to be a positive effect. And people are literally dying on the streets. And this is a way to make sure that they're safe, that they have the medical attention that they need. It's so important that we roll it out, both as a pilot programme, but across the country.
Okay, and we do want other people to contribute through our online platforms as well. And if you're watching on RTE, you're also going to follow our hashtag LP19. Councillor Neil McNeilis, I want to talk to you about the very committed people who are working in services around the country, but mostly people that you're involved with in Let's Get Talking. Whatever the service that's being provided, surely funding is constantly on their minds.
Yeah, so like every single town in the country, after an incident would happen with mental health, will set up a community organisation, and everybody rallies around and sets up this organisation. And they're relying on voluntary, getting donations for shaking buckets across the city. So our organisation, Let's Get Talking, we would look after about 350 people per month and give them counselling. And we have about 60 volunteers in Galway and in Dublin, and our organisation, it does not get one bit of state funding at all for it. And what we do is we look after people who are a great amount of it. It's actually all young kids now at the moment, anxiety, just anxiety, that social media, their phone, they don't know how to turn it off, the bullying that's going on in school. And the fact is that, and we also do a lot of addiction counselling. But if I'm a GP, I refer somebody to CIPC. You'd be lucky if you get in there about a 6 to 8 week waiting list, sometimes months. And if that doesn't work, then I might be referred to another counsellor. Treat it very, very quickly, get it out, might be given a load of meds. And what we're doing is we're putting out fires. And what these voluntary organisations are trying to do is actually prevention, talking about it. So we have all these amazing campaigns that we run. Get out there and talk about it and share your feelings and look for help. And when you do look for help, it's not there. And that's why these volunteer groups are the ones that are actually doing the work on the ground, actually struggling very, very hard. And then what happens here is that they're not getting any state funding. And that's why I think that we need to do.
Laura, you will have experience anyway as a student leader yourself, but working with the National Women's Council of Ireland, you have done a lot of work in this area. Share with us about a targeted approach, if that's the right approach for dealing with mental health.
Yeah, so first of all, thanks very much for the invitation to be here on behalf of the National Women's Council. I would definitely say that a targeted approach is needed because, women and men's experiences of mental health can be different. And of course, within that, you have minority groups. So, the migrant community, people from the travelling community, asylum seekers, they're going to experience, mental health in different ways and often experience double discrimination as well. But the first thing I would say is what we need in this country is we need universal access to mental health care supports, and we need those supports based on need and not on ability to pay. And they need to be available in urban areas, in rural areas, in every county across the country. The National Women's Council published our Out of Silence report in 2018 around women's mental health. And what we're hearing from women is that the way they experience mental health is through the lens of the inequalities that they experience on a daily basis. So things like pressures to perform well in work, caring responsibilities for maybe children at home or elderly relatives, things around body image as well. So pressures to look good as well. So there's a lot of pressures that women face, and then they often feel they don't have time, I suppose, to look after their own mental health. But some of the statistics that I think we often don't hear in the national conversation around women's experiences of mental health. Women are 24% more likely to self-harm. We know in terms of dementia that 2 out of 3 people that have dementia in this country are women. So those are quite some harrowing statistics. And of course, we know the statistics around men as well, the high suicide rates. But we do need a targeted approach to the issue. And I suppose one of the really concerning things as well in society, and you were talking about childcare earlier, but income poverty has a huge impact on mental health. Vast research has shown the impact of the homelessness crisis on people's mental health. And one thing I suppose that does concern us a lot in the Women's Council is that we have the fastest growing rate of women's homelessness in Europe. And we know that most of the families who are homeless are actually headed by women who are parenting alone. So these are factors that are really impacting on women in terms of their mental health. And this is what we're hearing in the Women's Council.
Okay, Rebecca, you're on Dublin City Council a number of years now, and I need you to keep it tight, but the funding that's available, surely there's huge pressure there as well for you as a councillor.
Oh, well, there's huge pressure on council funding to come back, but the mental health services are funded through the HSE, and I think this is the one thing around younger people. And to come back to Laura's point, the issue of homelessness, is I've certainly noticed this, is that you have an awful lot of teenagers with few services available to them. Jigsaw is one of the best intervention services, but the waiting lists are absolutely huge for that. The waiting lists for CAMS are huge, and you don't have the proper funding and intervention for people at an early stage that are there. And then people are self-medicating, and then there are huge complex problems, but the underlying societal issues such as the pressures, but fundamentally homelessness as well, where you have people who are living very, very chaotic lives because they're living in rental accommodation, they're living in hotel accommodation, they're living in family hubs. That's a huge issue for young people in education.
And homelessness is going to run the whole way through our themes as well today. But Jed, I want to come to you because we're also touching on areas of education as opposed to talking about the academic side of it as well. Group of people you have been working with, another wonderful national campaign, and that is Support Our Secretaries. When there is a time of funding being short, why is this campaign in particular important?
Well, Eleanor Sullivan very elegantly articulated Labour's demand for more investment in education and public education in this country. And we're very clear. I mean, as far as we're concerned in the Labour Party, we're at a pretty good point in terms of economic development. And we have a choice. We can either decide to reduce taxes or we can decide to invest in public services. And when we say we're going to invest in schools, we don't just say we're investing in young people's education and in teachers and in principals and in school buildings. We want to invest in our school secretaries. Even the name school secretary, I think, is redolent of another age. Our school secretaries, in fact, are our school administrators, our managers, counsellors indeed, accountants. They are managers par excellence. And there's an assumption that's made in this country that our school secretaries are by and large public service. They're not. They do the same work as public service but don't get the same rates of pay, the same conditions and so on. So I worked very closely this year with Forza Trade Union on a national campaign to support our school secretaries. We're demanding in the Labour Party and the trade union movement that our school administrators across the country become the public servants in reality that they really are, and that they get the respect that they are entitled to in the workplace.
Laura, I want to come back as well about the participation of women in education. It's another focus of the studies that have been conducted by the National Women's Council. Again, share some of your recent views. Again, the purpose of all of these panels are our party members are the policy makers, so it's interesting to hear outside perspectives.
Yeah, well, I guess, it's broadly recognised that in terms of, educational attainment, women do fare better than men. But I suppose the interesting thing is, after that, we know that there's a gender pay gap of 13.9% for women. We know that there's a pension gap as well of 26%. So there's a lot of inequalities that women face, I suppose, outside of education. But I suppose what we would advocate for as well is, an investment in lifelong learning and, a commitment that everybody should be able to continue with their education throughout their lives. And I don't think anybody should have to make the decision between paying extortionate rates for childcare or taking up a job or furthering their education, regardless of their gender, but that's certainly something that would affect women who maybe want to go back to education, or women who are parenting alone, for example, having to make those decisions. So those are some of the key things we're finding. But of course, we know women are underrepresented when it comes to science, technology, engineering and maths. More of an emphasis needs to be put on that. And in terms of further education and apprenticeships, I think there is a lot of gender stereotyping around that. I don't think gender should ever be a factor, I suppose, if somebody wants to become a mechanic or somebody wants to become a hairdresser, for example. So I do think we need a bit of a targeted approach in how we get people into apprenticeships as well, and that it's open to all.
And Jed, there has been some work done by our senators in the Labour Party in relation to gender pay gap.
Absolutely, and thanks to our good colleague and friend Senator Ivana Bacik, we developed legislation that has effectively forced the government to address the unconscionable gender pay gap in this country, and we'll see that legislation in place very, very shortly. It's imperfect, we believe it can be improved, but it is a start, and thanks to the Labour Party, we've managed to make that good start. But can I say this, Mags? Low pay in this country is very much a gender issue. We have a considerable number of women in particular. 66% of all of those who are on the national minimum wage are women, and that is completely unacceptable. There's lots of different reasons for that, and it's absolutely unacceptable that the Minister for Employment Affairs and Social Protection has this year decided that the minimum wage increase that's due in January will in effect be cancelled, and that is going to hammer women in particular. That's completely unacceptable to me, completely unacceptable to the Labour Party, the party that established the Low Pay Commission to make sure that work pays for everybody.
Neil, you're also a businessman in Galway.
Yeah.
And I suppose pay is, when people start talking about minimum wage, there's a little fear factor there about it, but it's the right thing to do.
It's the perfect thing to do. I've been an employer down through the years, and when that damn last decade that we had with the recession, you rely on your staff to actually, get you through it. If you have a good staff member, you've got a great business. You rely on your staff. And that's the most important thing to do. And that's why we have to look after them as much as possible. But when you look at this gig economy, Galway at the moment, how can somebody be expected to go around cycling on a bicycle and have a family wage, paying 2/3 of their wages for rent for a house? You have to have a living wage to actually be able to live. Full stop.
Okay, thank you for that. We're back again with Aoife.
Thank you, Mags. I have Ciara Fanning from the Irish Second Level Students' Union here by my side with me, and I want to come back very quickly on what Neil said there, just talking about the mental health issues that young people have and the pressure that's on them. And I think we know from our student union days the impact that financial pressure has on students. Ciara, you represent the students that are probably most impacted by any restrictions in terms of access to third level education. What are your members telling you at the minute?
Yeah, so second level students really, I think, are caught now in terms of restriction of access to third level, and they are facing huge barriers. And it's an issue that comes up a lot from on-the-ground discussions with our members. But to start with, I think a lot of what we're hearing is people feel almost automatically as if they're blocked off from accessing third level merely from the Leaving Certificate system. So people feel, and it comes back to the point made about apprenticeships, that if they don't excel in learning with rote learning and regurgitation in a series of exams, that third level is completely not an option for them. So I think a big issue there is kind of a duty that we have to promote apprenticeships and promote alternative forms of education and alternative routes to third level, which I think we're really failing students with at the moment, as people are kind of pigeonholed into this traditional third level experience. But on a wider note, I think the housing crisis just has a massive impact on people and their access to third level. It's a conversation that comes up constantly when you're talking about what you want to do in college, where you want to go, and it comes up even in appointments with guidance counsellors and your teachers. So it's really something that students can't escape. And people are kind of put in a position now where they're not choosing what they want to do in college based on the course or based on the career that they want to pursue. It's based on what's closest to them and what's affordable to them, and there is a complete lack of purpose-built student accommodation, and we see then places like UniNest and Ziggurat sprouting up across the country because they see this gap in the market, and people are forced to pay extortionate rates of above €10,000 for the year. And they're kind of putting in bowling alleys and theatres into student accommodation when it's not what students need, and it's not a viable option for them to be paying this much for accommodation. And what we hear a lot from our members is people choosing college courses based on what's easiest for them to commute to. So this is really something that we need to address, and it shows that the housing crisis goes outside of the norm. It's really affecting second level students as well as third level, and as well as the funding that people are getting is that a SUSI grant may have covered.
On that, in terms of funding, we understand the benefits and how important it is to have access to third level for people in this country, but is the funding adequate?
The funding isn't adequate, really, when we look at housing and when we look at access to third level. When we look even at the SUSI rates, they haven't increased to match the current cost of living, which has increased exponentially in the past few years. So where a grant may, in the past, have covered the full cost of accommodation in Cork or Dublin, now it's barely covering half. So people are facing huge issues with access in terms of families actually can't afford to send people to third level. And the SUSI grant is really there to make third level accessible for everyone and make sure that people do have access to furthering their education. But currently, when we look at it, there's huge barriers in place. Even students who are working part-time at the weekends or during the summer, they're now being forced to give up their jobs so they qualify for the SUSI grant.
I just want to go to Councillor Kevin Dunne, newly elected in Dublin City, but you're also the chair of the coalition that has come together, a coalition of unions that have come together to call for publicly funded education. What are the core priorities for your coalition?
So it's a coalition for the publicly funded higher education. So we there's three issues that we focus on. It's the issue of access, work and quality. So access in relation to fees and grants and stuff that Ciara touched on there in terms of it's all well and good. First of all, we want an end to fees, but that's all not very good if you're in a position where it's €10,000 a year to pay the rent or something like that. The other thing is that the working conditions for staff, from groundskeepers right the way up to professors, is abysmal in our third level system. And you have people on if and when contracts and things like that. And they're being expected to do more and more with less and less all the time. So the terms and conditions and the security that they're offered need to be addressed as well. And the final thing then is that we want to improve the overall quality in the system. So that it's a properly funded and it's an adequately funded system. And we are of the view that unless you're tackling all three of those things at once, you're not really going to deliver the system that we need. Like, I mean, we can't measure the outcome or the value of our education system by where we are on university world rankings or how much a graduate is likely to earn because they have a degree. I think a mark of ambition for society or for us would be to invest in education for education's sake. Like, if at the end of the day somebody learns something that really didn't need to know in their life, I'm okay with that. You know, I can accept that as a sacrifice that we're to make. I think the Labour Party is the only party that has ever really had any sort of significant ambition around, particularly around higher education. And we're just in a space now whereby things have been long-fingered and things have been put off for so long, and we're essentially duct tape and hope is what's holding it together.
And I want to ask you, in terms of this appropriate and ideal system, how do we bring that about?
Well, I think I think it's grassroots activism that will facilitate that, and that's really what the coalition that I'm working with is about. So it's made up of students' unions and trade unions. We'll be looking to get active on campuses across the country. It'll be open to wider society as well. So it's not a case of you need to be somehow an invested stakeholder in third level education to be active on this. Everyone benefits from a system in which society values education, from early years right the way up to post-secondary and tertiary and all of that. So we are starting to become active. We are starting to move out into campuses, and it'll be open to people right the way across to support that and to work that. But I think that really what it'll require is it'll require us all uniting under one banner, coming together and talking about what and working towards those collective goals. Because we have, I think, up to now worked in silos where it's either work that needs to be addressed or access that needs to be addressed. But in fact, it's all of those things.
Councillor Dunne, thank you so much, and we'll be very much looking forward to getting involved in that campaign. Over to Mags.
Thanks very much again. Thanks very much again. I'm just joined by two new contributors, and we'll come back to questions from the audience later on, if you don't mind. And for the next section, it's to discuss a couple of laws that were changed recently in Northern Ireland. And to lead that discussion and introduce us to it from conference floor, we're joined by Leah Ray.
Thank you, Conference. As a rights activist in the North, dedicated to securing the rights and equality provisions set out in the Good Friday Agreement, I am delighted to be in the conference today, dedicated to building an equal society for across our island. It is clear that our labour movement, based on principles of social economic fairness, social justice, rights and equality, can advance real progress in our society and secure real changes for all our citizens. And this movement unites all, regardless of community background, affiliation or religion. This time last year, I never would have imagined that the North would have witnessed such landmark historical change. the legalisation of marriage equality and the decriminalisation of abortion services. But today, thanks to Labour MPs at Westminster who heard the struggles and the demands of our LGBT community and our women, and recognising that these historic rights violations and inequality could no longer continue in the North, today I can say loudly and proudly, the North is now.
Thanks very much, Leah. Thank you so much for that. Senator Ivana Bacik, most recently crowned, if you hadn't heard, Irish Woman Lawyer of the Year for your advocacy, for your campaign work that you have carried out. Thank you from us. And before I bring in Elaine Crory from Alliance for Choice, Ivana, you might sum up in layman terms what has happened that we were all staying up to welcome at midnight one night recently.
Well, as Leah has just said, there's been an amazing development in Northern Ireland in terms of progressive law reform just in the last few weeks, when we saw, thanks to the tireless campaigning of activists like Leah, like Elaine and others in Alliance for Choice Northern Ireland and in other organisations campaigning for marriage equality and for abortion rights. We've seen, along with the work of British Labour MPs, Stella Creasy and Conor McGinn in particular, we've seen a move to ensure that if Stormont wasn't back in operation, if the Northern Ireland Executive and Parliament weren't back in operation, Westminster had passed a law providing that marriage equality and abortion would become legalised in Northern Ireland. Stormont didn't get back up and running, and therefore we now have this new and dramatic development in Northern Ireland, which has paved the way for finally for marriage equality for same-sex couples and for abortion rights for women in Northern Ireland, and it's a tremendous achievement.
Elaine Corey, Alliance for Choice, thank you also for your work on this campaign. How important has the recent change made, the difference it's made to you and the people you're involved with in work?
It's a profound sense of relief. It isn't something that we saw coming this year, because there's people, I mean, I myself have been only at it for a number of years, but there's people who've been at it for decades, and there's people who have died before this has managed to happen, and many of us saw this coming a decade or more in the future. And because we had developed strong relationships with Stella Creasy specifically, who worked with us to help get that legislation through. It wasn't the first attempt by any means, but it's the one that finally broke through and everything lined up just right. And it's really wonderful to see that we're at a point now where we're on the edge of making new legislation that will bring accessibility. We have decriminalisation, but we don't have accessibility just yet. By the end of March, new legislation has to be in place. So this is an opportunity right now. You go through a moment of relief and then immediately you pick up your tools and start working again, because this is an opportunity to craft really good legislation. There's been, as I'm sure you know, imperfections, let's say, in legislation here since Day 8 was repealed. So this is a time for us really to learn from the mistakes that were maybe made down here, or the shortcomings, let's say, of legislation, and to try and get abortion access as accessible as possible.
And sometimes there is a delay and we get a notice to say we're going out marching again, and you say, oh God, I thought that was passed, but there can be delays, Ivana.
Well, there can be delays. I mean, we saw the amazing result in our abortion referendum in May of last year, where 66.4% of Irish people voted to repeal the 8th Amendment. And as Elaine says, many of us had spent decades campaigning for that. And it was incredible to see that people reached out with compassion and with understanding and voted to change our law, and that was so important for us as Irish women. And similarly in 2015 when we voted to change the law on marriage equality. But on each occasion it did take some months then to deliver the legislation required, first to bring in marriage equality and to ensure that couples could get married, and secondly then last year to bring in the law necessary to ensure access to abortion services in Ireland. We are still working for change on the, to improve the access to service in this jurisdiction. So, for example, a number of us in Labour, myself and Jed and other colleagues in the Shannon and in the Dáil, are working to bring in buffer zone legislation to ensure that women, when they seek to access services here, Mags, don't have to run the gauntlet of intimidatory and oppressive tactics from anti-choice groups. And we've seen a bit of that over the summer, and we're working to ensure that that won't happen and that we can prevent that happening. But we really... Go ahead. And we want to support you, Elaine, and all our friends and comrades in the North to ensure that your law will be as progressive as possible. I think you've said submissions should be made from any of us here who've got who've worked on the legislation here and who can say what we think might be good practice to have in Northern Ireland.
Absolutely. It's open to public consultation right now. It opened on Tuesday, and it's a 6-week consultation, so it closes in early December, and there is time. It's online, so you can do it from the comfort of your own home. And really, we're asking people to draw attention to maybe the part of legislation here that is imperfect, such as buffer zones. For example, we don't have the suggestion of a 3-day waiting period, which is fantastic, but there are other things as well. We would like it to be a little bit longer than the access here, which is 12 weeks, and they're suggesting 12 or 14. We want people to ask for up to 22. Nobody chooses to go that long unless it's a crisis, so really people, it's as early as possible, as late as necessary, but to be as late as necessary, we need that openness. So this is all online, and people can spend a little bit of time doing that. Alliance for Choice is going to put out guidelines on how we would prefer people respond, and not a copy-paste scenario, because that doesn't really work. Speak from your heart, speak from your own experience, but you can really help us shape really excellent laws.
And looking around this room today alone, the experience in this room from Labour Women, Labour Equality members like Jed and Rebecca, who have also been out marching and campaigning and involved in these 2 campaigns here. So tell me about your involvement over the years.
Well, I suppose I would have been involved with Ivana at a very, very early stage in terms of formulating Labour Party policy around repeal and around action on X as well, which was hopefully inadequate, but it was what we were working at the time. I'm very involved in the referendums, and can I just say, I think it's fantastic how it happened in Northern Ireland, because even though both referendums were great in Ireland and we got the right result, they were also very traumatic, right?
Yes,
particularly having to go up to doors and knock and ask people for your votes. And I remember some awful stories, particularly the early stages of the marriage equality campaign, where people were asking for their rights to be in a relationship and some of the stuff that they got back. And so I think how it happened in Northern Ireland is much more progressive, much more humane, and the same results as a result at the end of it.
Jed, County Louth, border county. You can get married on both sides now.
Absolutely, you know, that's one way. I think I want to see United Ireland, but isn't it great to see that Ireland has at least united at this point in time on marriage equality and on women's right?
Here, here.
I think it is. There's lots of talk these days about regulatory alignment between Britain and Northern Ireland. This is the kind of regulatory alignment those of us who are social democrats and democratic socialists, and those of us who want to see a progressive society want to see. We waited too long for this. I think we should put on the record as well our thanks and appreciation to our friends and colleagues in the North for helping us in our campaigns down here over the years. Remember the catch cry, the North is next. The North is next. It's now happening. Thanks to our colleagues, our Labour Party colleagues in the UK, Stella Creasy and Conor McGinn in particular, of course, a very proud Armagh man who campaigned to introduce this legislation, got it over the line with Stella Creasy and the Labour Party colleagues.
That's great. I'm going to go over to Aoife now, and Aoife is joined by somebody very special to us.
Thanks, Mags. Before I come to Matthew here, we have some tweets that are after coming in from our first discussion on early years. A tweet from Fia Chris that says, Mashiv Sean Sherlock agus Party Lochdebre. Well done, Sean Sherlock and the Labour Party. Tá cuam lani anhachtach mar le bun chlocha chintu dar sochi in the me gachtin in non-portach lacha. So childcare and access to childcare is very, very important for a foundation of a state where everyone can participate. And from Linda Kelly, it's the extortionate cost, lack of places, the poor subsidy and poor terms and conditions for staff employed in the sector. Thank you guys so much, and keep tweeting into us. I'm going to go to Matthew now. Matthew Core, on that fateful night as a political activist and equality campaigner, it's probably a night that you'll never forget, but as the clock was counting down, can you tell us where were you and how were you feeling?
Well, I was trying not to get too excited because, as you know, we've had several attempts to introduce this legislation, both at Stormont and Westminster, and they've failed several times, which was utterly demoralising, and I just didn't want to go through that again. So, just to try to ground myself, not get too excited, but on that deadline, the 21st of October, I did realise it's going to pass. So myself and a few other campaigners gathered in a local gay bar in Belfast to watch the countdown, and sort of told stories of our campaigns over the years. And then as we watched the clock down to midnight and the celebrations commenced, we realised that once midnight hit, we were finally now equal.
What a moment.
But I remember being very excited back in 2015 when I saw the marriage equality referendum here. But that's been a long 4 years. I mean, I was very excited when that passed, but it didn't include me. I mean, in Monaghan I could have got married, but in my home city, Armagh, mere 10 miles up the road, the right didn't extend to me. But now, north or south, I can say I do.
And how did it feel when, I suppose, we had marriage equality here and you were on that waiting game? You were just wondering, will it, won't it, will we ever?
Yeah, it was just a waiting game. I mean, endless campaigning, as Elaine talked about too on the abortion campaign, it just constantly waiting. Well, everybody kind of enjoyed it down here. But we do finally have it, but I must say, marriage equality only really scratches the surface. There's so many more issues we need to deal with. I mean, we need to tackle homophobic and transphobic bullying in our schools. We need to create a more diverse curriculum to reflect our society today. We need to ensure access to healthcare for our transgender community. We need to work together with our comrades across the Labour family in the UK and Ireland to make sure that we build an equal society right across this island. Nobody can be left behind.
That's brilliant. And I suppose, Matthew, I want to pick up on something you said there. You know, there's still a long, long list of things that we need to fix and resolve and achieve. What is the best approach? Have we learned lessons from the past campaigns that we've been through now? What can we take from that and make sure that we can get to that, through that list a little bit quicker?
I think we just need to make sure we work together. I mean, when one part of the island achieves something, we need to make sure that our brothers and sisters in the other part, whether that's north or south or east or west, we need to make sure every part of this island is equal. We also need to, hopefully in December, we'll see the UK Labour sweep into Downing Street, where they can help us to create a more equal society. And as well, get Claire Hanna elected.
Matthew, thank you so much. I'm going to throw back over to Mags now. Thank you.
Thanks, Eva, and thank you, Matthew, for sharing that with us. Really do appreciate it. I'd also like to add my own thanks to our friend Stella Creasy MP, to our party member and friend Conor McGinn in St Helens. Wish them both the best of luck in the next general election. Also give a little shout out to the Labour Party Irish Society, group of people who come over and work with us on many campaigns across this entire country. And I know for sure in the coming weeks you'll be back over with us as we go knocking doors with Claire Hanna in Belfast. So next up, as you can see, we will be discussing health and housing. But from the floor, her first time to speak at party conference, and I'm delighted to say, in her capacity as our general election candidate for Galway East, Marion Spellman.
Thank you, Mags. Housing and health are two disasters of this Fine Gael government, and every decision they've made and every failure has been propped up and supported by Fianna Fáil. Rents are at record levels, and we still haven't seen a freeze. Instead, they've signed off on a 4% annual increase. People simply cannot afford to pay rent, and it's the greatest contributor to homelessness. And the only public housing being delivered are those Labour started in 2015. We still haven't seen action on affordable housing or the level of state intervention that is needed. Labour has a 16 billion plan to deliver 80,000 homes over 5 years. Now, in relation to health, we have record waiting lists and hundreds on trolleys in our emergency department. 679 people on trolleys last Tuesday alone. There is a crisis in frontline disability services in relation to staff, no respite or residential houses, and people with intellectual disabilities in day services having the training allowance of a measly €32 being cut. We also have delays in home help, where people who need home help and could live out their lives with dignity in their homes end up having to go into nursing homes, which is shocking. I have worked for the health service for the last 33 years, and I don't think I've ever seen it as bad as it is at this moment in time. Home and health are a human right, so now is time for change, and here is where we need to start. Thank you.
Thank you, Marion. And thank you for standing for us. Eleanor Sullivan, TD, spokesperson on housing and many other portfolios. First of all, tell us, is our housing policy ambitious enough?
Well, I think our housing policy is realistic and we're going to achieve it, which I think is the difference that Marianne has just pointed out in relation to government policy, because theirs is a failed policy. I mean, if you look at targets like taking children out of hotels, like building rapid build, like the actual construction programme, they simply haven't achieved. Ours is realistic and it's also responding to the absolute crisis that we have out there in housing and homelessness. And I think the other difference, which is really important, is that our policy is based on the public sector leading. So using publicly owned land and trusting our councils to actually build, not have them going backwards and forwards to the Department of Housing every time they want to move one step forward. So we've seen an inertia in relation to this hugely important human right. And again, Marianne absolutely pointed it out. It is a human right and a human need. Our policy is practical. It's achievable. We have described where the funding would come from, which is really important, and we can do it. And in the meantime, we also need to address this issue around the cost of rental. And we would implement, and indeed when Alan was Minister, he implemented a rent freeze. We would implement a rent freeze because rents now have gone up to absolutely enormous proportions and totally unaffordable. For families with decent enough jobs cannot afford rent now. So that would be in the meantime while we actually construct the houses. But the difference again is that we will actually do it. And one other difference, when we talk about affordable, we mean affordable in relation to your income, not just say a 10% chop off the market rate, which is completely unaffordable for most people.
Okay, we'll come back again to you on further issues, but Councillor Alison Gilliland, you're chairperson of Dublin City Council's Strategic Policy Committee on Housing, as well as representing people in Artane and Whitehall. There must be some incredible stories coming through your work.
Yeah, my biggest, I suppose, query is I'm facing a rent increase. I know my family can't afford it. What am I going to do? And that is heartbreaking because I know there's a possibility there that that family could end up in homelessness. Like, we do take them through the processes. You try and get additional financial help for them, and there is that out there. But ultimately, when we have a rent increase, it adds significant more stress to families. And it is, as Mariella said, it is the key driver of families into homelessness, and we know that. So as a local authority grappling with that, the frustration that we're dealing with, and Jan noted it there, is that every time we want to build or develop a site of our own, we have to go back and forward and back and forward and back and forward to the department with plans, with valuations, with viability studies, and it's almost as if they're finding an excuse every time, say, oh, go back and I'd like to see another design, or use a different brick. And in all honesty, they are delaying this spend. And it's our belief that the local authorities should be the lead planners, developers and builders of public housing on our own land. So to do that, we need funding, proper stream of funding, but we also need autonomy to build our own capacity and to build roofs over people's heads and expand what we have as social housing into affordable housing that is inclusive of people perhaps up to 70, 80 income among them. And that is our aim on Dublin City Council over the next 5 years. And I suppose what I challenge myself as chair is to have that discussion and to find that pathway to realise that and work with our department in a very constructive way that will take out those inhibitors that are there in our path.
And even on a very human level, as a councillor, what is it like going back to your constituents and saying, I'm sorry, we have nothing for you, or I'm sorry, there's a difficult process?
Oh, it's terrible, and people will say they're in overcrowded situations, they're waiting on the social housing list, they've been there for 8 years, they say, I've only moved maybe 20 spaces, I'm still number 200 and something. And I say to them, in my own area, I know there's about 4 or 5 developments in the pipeline, but it's going to be 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So I know they're going to be stuck in that. I think the worst thing you can do is give them false hope. Sure. You have to be realistic with them and talk through the process, but that doesn't take away their pain and it doesn't take away the struggle that they're experiencing every single day.
And Jan, because of that delay, how do you protect people who are then under pressure in the private rented sector?
Well, we have proposed a number of measures, particularly around a lot of people are put out of their homes for a variety of spurious reasons, like that the place is going to be done up, etc., the family member needs it. We've already brought forward proposals from opposition in relation to that particular area. But we believe now that there does need to be a rent freeze, because the 4% rent pressure zones, and they're not all over the country, which is another problem with them. And we would argue that if you have any kind of rent control, it has to be national. You can't have these kind of artificial boundaries. But 4% now is far, far higher than the actual increase in people's incomes. So rents have gone through the roof, even where there are rent pressure zones. So we would say, and again, as I said, it's been done already by the Labour Party in government, we want now to not allow rents to go up any higher. That is an interim measure until we get the homes built, which we need to build. But in the meantime, we have to protect people from homelessness. I mean, like Alison... Yep. I'm literally in my clinics yesterday, I was talking to a mother with 2 children who's living in a hotel. Now, that is just awful, and we cannot allow that to continue. And that is a basic driving force for all of us in the Labour Party to ensure that we do what we do well, which is to build houses and to absolutely get rid of the scourge of homelessness, which is a terrible blight on our society at the moment.
Alan Kelly, TD, I could have you, I suppose, up on all of the panels here today, but you're spokesperson for health. It's a portfolio that's not for the faint-hearted, but you're an experienced politician, so you call it as it is, don't you?
I do. I think, to be honest with you, where we are in relation to healthcare in Ireland is probably the most unbalanced we've ever been in Ireland. It's when you hear private hospitals advertising on national radio for people to go to them, it actually turns my stomach.
There.
It shows the ideology of this Fine Gael government. It shows the inequality that they actually push out there and are happy to oversee. And I can say one thing to all my colleagues and friends here in the audience tonight. Simon Harris wanted a general election in November because I can tell you what we are facing into in the coming months in relation to our hospitals is going to be, unfortunately, for the people of Ireland, the worst we'll ever see. The figures that we have now on trolleys are record numbers, and it's only early November. Myself and Jan represent the Midwest. We talk literally daily now at this stage in relation to the crisis in our hospital inside in Limerick, which is our natural hospital for everyone around the Midwest. We have never, ever experienced what we're experiencing at the moment. And unfortunately, this is policy-driven. They've had over 10 years now of Fine Gael ministers for health, and basically ideology has driven the agenda that we have today, and that's why it needs a strong Labour agenda to change that, because it's only with public investment, it's only with support for workers, it's only with a situation where we rebalance health so that we have more investment in community and in primary care that we actually change this agenda, and that's what we have to do.
I'll be back to you as well, but Dr. Mark Murphy, you're a GP in the South Inner City. You're a lecturer in general practice in the Royal College of Surgeons. And at a time when we read about the lack of GP care, the lack of GPs, you've just recently opened up a practice. The theme of this conference is building an equal society. Is equality visible for you every day in your work?
Yeah, I guess it's an amazing privilege to work in a really trusted part of a community, and you get a perspective on the housing situation in a community, on the impact of transport policies, on the impact of climate change, unfair access to education, and the kind of apartheid that is actually apparent in our communities. And I think on a broader, before we even get to healthcare, the amazing privilege about being a GP is that you see the impact of broader politics over decades that determine our health, my health, the privileges that I have had that make me a healthier person. And I suppose that's why I'm in the Labour Party, because you see these structural inequalities that a fair society will look after its children, particularly in the first 5 years of life. And, you know, with uncertain housing conditions and homelessness, I mean, it's a fallacy to think that healthcare can impact those domains. So it's it radicalizes you because you realize that they're the important things that matter. But notwithstanding that, Alan is absolutely right. And in fairness, there is a cross-party policy about sláinte care, and we are in favour of it. But I think we have to tease this out a little bit. We know that there are covert policies behind the scenes. That is a lack of regulation, a failure to act and legislate to protect the sideway access to privatisation. A report last week said we have an increasing privatisation of our healthcare services. But we're like, wait, I thought sláinte care was our healthcare policy. So what's happening is that because of a failure of a government to be brave, to legislate, to act, to counter vested interests, we are suffering. And I think it's a really important moment, coming up to the by-elections and coming up to the general election, that we actually articulate the social democratic values that underpin the sláinte care that we want to bring about. So,
Alan, you can't argue with that. You can't argue with that. The failure of this current government.
Absolutely, and you don't just attack the government for the sake of attacking them, as easy as that might be. But really, there is Mark is totally right, and he said it more eloquently than I could. There is a kind of a sideways agenda here. So I spent 11 months writing up sláinte care with people across the party. But then you see, for instance, National Maternity Strategy, National Children's Hospital, and you see, oh, there's money in here to allow for private access. That's against sláinte care. So why is it in there? You see, that's the whole point. You see, there is an agenda within this government, within Fine Gael, which will always be orientated towards unequal access role for healthcare. And that's not acceptable to us in the Labour Party. The reason I get into politics is because I believe that no matter how much you have in your pocket, you should have equal access to healthcare and education. It's the basic right.
You've also been in education as well.
Yeah.
So what's your reaction to what Alan is saying? You're finding the same in Limerick.
Absolutely. I mean, we share the same hospital, as Alan has said, where, the trolley figures are absolutely astronomical. But the basic point, and I think Mark did articulate it right across the policy sector, is that for the Labour Party, we want an equality that basically the right-wing parties are not interested in. They're interested in private access, right across, whether you're talking about health, housing, childcare. If you have the money, you can buy what you need. We are fundamentally different, and that's what drives our policies, whether it be health or housing. And that will continue to drive, and that is what motivates all of us to be in the Labour Party.
And extra difficulties in the community that you're serving, Mark, as a GP?
Yeah, I guess they're very complicated issues, like housing, like climate change. Health is very complicated, but I do think we have to be brave, optimistic, positive. Every other country has a better way of accessing healthcare, and we should be brave and proud enough to demand that we have that also. And I think that it's not right that over half the population have to pay the full whack of the market forces to see me as a doctor. That's not good enough. And I think we've become culturally accustomed to what's happening in healthcare. So I think there are challenges in the community, but I believe we can increase access to people like me, to primary care professionals. We can make governance better in the community. We can have integrated care. And of course, the most pressing issue is fairer access to secondary care. So there are challenges. We don't have enough GPs. We especially don't have enough practice nurses. But let's get on and let's start being proactive as a government, and there's a responsibility on myself and my colleagues. We all are in this together, and I think there's a collective, inertia because we feel that it's too big. It's not, and we can change, and sláinte care is the vehicle, but it has to be pushed in the right direction, and that is a social democratic vision.
Alison, I'll just come to you on that again. The people that you are dealing with, they're getting a double whammy if they don't have access to healthcare and they don't have access to housing.
Absolutely, and the stress that people are under trying to meet extraordinary high rents, or that you might have 3 families sharing a 3-bed house, that does have a detrimental impact on their health. And then if they don't have that swift, affordable access
to healthcare, it compounds that inequality that they're already feeling because they don't have proper housing, they don't have proper health. And it's fundamentally that. It's about affordability. It's about giving people equality of access, which will lead to equality of opportunity in all other aspects of their life, whether it be education, employment, career perspectives.
And Alan, I know it's 9th of November, you kind of mentioned it earlier about the winter is coming. What are we going to look forward to over the next few months?
Not very good, unfortunately, and I don't say that with any glee. The situation as regards where we're going, as regards to trolley numbers, as regards to waiting lists, is just going to elevate. Unfortunately, even from a capital point of view, the government announced their capital plan. For the first time ever, they announced a 3-year capital plan 10 months after the first year has begun. Why? Because they're profiling. No, nothing is getting cancelled when it comes to healthcare. It's just all being profiled. So when you look forward to your nursing home or your various other investments, different parts of the hospitals need to be upgraded. Just look forward to them a bit longer. That's all they're saying, is basically look forward to them a bit longer. Because ultimately, the greatest scandal I've ever seen in my political life from a spending point of view is the National Children's Hospital. And it's going to impact on our society for generations. And I'm going to tell you something. Students who are going to be doing MBA or MBS programs into the future are going to have it as a case study. And people talk about criticising Simon Harris, and I criticise him about this. But the real person to be criticised about this is Pascal Donoghue. If anybody was actually at the table in charge and looking at spending, this would not have happened. He was asleep at the wheel. It shouldn't have happened. A man who was sitting a few doors down from him was sitting on the actual board, but they never spoke for over a year about it. It's just not credible.
And thank you again also for your work on PAC as well. I mean, you are looking at the purse strings there as well.
Well, I suppose I speak, from two sides. Obviously, my health spokesmanship, and also I'm vice chair of PAC. But, when it comes to health spending is so critical. We need to get bang for buck. The fact is that the amount of money we're spending, we're just not spending it in the right way. We should be, we have to turn the whole ship around and ensure we're spending more in relation to community. People who are ending up sitting inside and waiting inside A&Es shouldn't end up there in the first place if our health system was functioning the way in which it should function. And that's the fact of the matter. We should be spending more in community. We should be spending more in community. We should have proper primary care centres. We should have more doctors, and we should be supporting GPs like Mark, who are actually going out of their way to try and do the right thing in society. Unfortunately, what's happening? Because we don't have a registered pay agreement in relation to some form of healthcare workers, because we're not resourcing GPs, consultants, etc., they're leaving when they graduate. And that is the type of Ireland that Fine Gael have created and this government has created.
Okay, thank you, Alan, for ending on that note, and thank you to our panellists. I'm going over to Aoife now, and she's flanked by 2 new councillors. Welcome.
Thank you, Mags. I want to come back to a point Alison made earlier, because I have newly elected Councillor Paul O'Brien from Wicklow with me. The difficulties in terms of dealing with the housing issue on a local level on council, do you share that experience? Do you feel the same?
Oh, without question. When I got elected back in late May and came in June, I was full of hope, I was full of energy, I was full of enthusiasm, and then the hard reality hits, because I think we've become desensitised to homelessness at this stage because it's on the news constantly. But it's only when you become a councillor and you have to meet these people, and the emotion that's, it's palpable, to be honest with you, and it's heartbreaking, and especially coming from a commuter county like Wicklow, where you have hard-working people travelling up and down the N11 every day, and then they can't even afford their own house. It's heartbreaking. And then you've people on the housing list, 12, 13, 14 years, being put off. And I have to commend the council staff, because they're doing a great work. They're doing a fantastic job. But it's like going into the boxing ring with Muhammad Ali with one hand tied behind your back, because even though they're doing a great job, they're being hamstrung by this government, because it's catch up all the way.
Alison mentioned there's extreme frustrations from the councillors' side, and you feel very much the same way?
Frustration, now I say, I came in with enthusiasm, and that's been taken over by frustration, because the process is so slow. You've people coming in looking to apply for the Rebuild Ireland and being told, no, there's no funding. These are hard-working people that need our dedication. And frustrating in Wicklow because we produced 2 Labour ministers, Liam Kavanagh and Liz McManus, who eradicated the housing lists. And here we are, back to square one. Not just square one, back to worse than ever. So it's very frustrating.
And in terms of changes, in order for you guys to be able to deal with these issues more efficiently and effectively, what does need to change?
The government. I was lucky enough to be selected on Thursday night, and my main theme on Thursday night was this country needs Labour. It needs ministers like Liam Kavanagh. It needs ministers like Liz McManus and Jan and Alan, because without Labour, we will not have that compassionate society.
Thank you, Paul. We're going to stay talking about housing for a second, and I have Councillor Angela Feeney by my side. Angela, we were speaking about third level and the issues students are facing earlier. Ciara mentioned the difficulties that the housing crisis is causing for students. As someone who works in third level, are you picking up on that?
Absolutely, and if I work in third level, but also I live in Maynooth, which is a university town. So we're seeing how the housing crisis and this shortage of houses is really impacting on the students. I've never seen so many students working with me who actually are under such stress. For example, we had more deferrals this year than ever before and last year, and the students are citing financial reasons they cannot afford to find accommodation. I mean, that is having a huge impact. They're having to drop out of college to work for an extra year to afford the rents. So that's really, really having an impact. And what I'd like to ask this government is, what happened to building council houses? I mean, when did that stop? Why aren't we building council houses? I mean, when you look at their spending, €750 million every year, that's a third of the housing budget goes on HAP, which is essentially going into private landlords' pockets, when we could be building over 3,000 houses a year for that money. And we could be building zero-emission houses, which would be the same cost to build them, and would be cheaper to heat. So it's, it's a no-brainer on this one. I don't know why. I mean, I grew up in a council estate. I benefited from the likes of Emmett Stagg coming round to my widowed mother and saying, we'll help you get a council house, and that happened. And I don't know why this government isn't doing that, except that they're calling it affordable housing. I think that's the greatest misnomer ever. I mean, if we saw on the O'Davany project, for example, €370,000 is an affordable house. Nobody can afford to get that kind of a mortgage nowadays. And I saw it on the doorsteps, as Paul did, when we were out in the canvas. This was the one issue that parents were really feeling in despair about. They were saying, my son or daughter is never going to be able to move out and get themselves on the property ladder, and they're working, and they can't get out. So it's really having an impact on everybody, particularly young people. And I think people are living lives of quiet desperation at the moment.
I want to bring you back there for a second, because a lot of my friends are saying that what they are paying on rent now is almost double what they would if they were to have a mortgage. And a lot of, I suppose, my colleagues as well are being forced to do. It's not just students that are commuting longer hours. It's the young working professionals that are being pushed out further. Yeah. How can we deal with this? How can we resolve this issue?
Well, as I say, build more houses. At the end of the day, the state needs to build more houses. It's a no-brainer. You have to build, and that really has to happen. It has to happen soon. If you take the money that I mentioned earlier on that's going into HAP, use that money to build houses, and at the end of the day, people then have what we call an equal society. They actually have the basic right, as Jan mentioned, to have a roof over your head. That's a basic human right.
Thank you, Angela. We'll throw back over to Mags now. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much. And Angela, as somebody who lived in Maynooth for 7 years, I was almost ordained myself. We're going to move on now to climate, and a wonderful campaigner and activist on conference floor, Chloe Manahan.
Thank you. Labour wants a Green New Deal to help everyone to play their part in slashing carbon emissions. We have a track record on climate action, from bringing Ireland's first climate change law to the incredible legacy of politicians like Andrew Montague and the city bike schemes. Labour wants system change. Climate action cannot just benefit the few. It should reduce inequality for the many and deliver climate justice for everyone. Labour will retrofit 100,000 homes a year, lowering heating bills, emissions and creating local construction jobs. We'll empower semi-states like Bord na Móna to create new sustainable jobs in clean energy, recycling and land management. We're meeting in the Midlands, where the government is allowing Bord na Móna to abandon workers and communities in the area. Labour would expand public transport, reduce fares, and invest in cycling. The climate crisis poses an existential crisis to each and every single one of us, but it also provides us with a fantastic opportunity to reimagine a new, equitable society and economy that respects both the earth and the people that live on it. Inequality simply can't be allowed to become a byproduct of climate action. For years, the government has opposed our proposals, from banning microplastics to putting a levy on coffee cups. Now, just before an election, they finally start to move to do this. It's just too little, too late, and we cannot afford to wait any longer.
Chloe, thank you for that introduction. Niamh Garvey, you're Head of Policy and Advocacy in Trócaire. It's not an equal society for many around the world when it comes to climate justice.
No, absolutely not. I mean, as Chloe has mentioned, climate change poses an existential risk. It threatens all of us. But we in Trócaire know that the people on the front lines of the climate crisis over the past decade and longer are the most vulnerable people in the world. So we've seen the number of climate-related disasters double over the last decade and a half. And we've seen communities such as those in Southern and East Africa facing successive droughts. And just earlier this year, Cyclone Idai resulted in the loss of 1,200 lives in Southern and East Africa and thousands more homeless. But as we were saying, it's not just the most vulnerable who are going to be at risk, it is everybody. And the real injustice of climate change is that we've known this, we've known the causes for over 30 years. The science has been clear and getting clearer, and yet we have failed to take urgent enough action soon enough. And that's the real injustice, I think. We're on track for a 3 degrees plus world, despite the commitments in the Paris Agreement of all countries to aim to keep temperatures below 2 degrees or nearer 1.5 degrees. And it's a real injustice.
And how more frustrating is it for your job then when you have climate deniers attacking us on Twitter and all these other social media platforms?
Well, I have to say, having worked on climate for over a decade myself, I think that was a feature much earlier on, over a decade ago. It is still a problem, but I've actually been really heartened by the huge shift in public opinion in relation to climate change. We've had the school strikers who've done an amazing job. We're seeing many, many more people. It's now a mainstream issue. So while there may be a number of voices out there who continue to troll, there's always going to be trolls. Really, I think the public have shifted and are now ahead of the politicians in terms of demanding action more urgently.
And fair play to those young people who were getting us out on Fridays. And Senator Humphreys, I've often seen you outside the gates of Leinster House on a Friday, and it's not on your way home either. It's to support these young people. And a spokesperson for transport as well, and climate, it's a mixed bag for you there, but I mean, you're busy.
And it comes down to choices as well, Mags, and I think Chloe touched on it very clearly there. We have to make the choice of taking 33 million tonnes of carbon, of greenhouse gases in the next few years. And we have to do it urgently, and transport is going to play a key role in that. To do that, we need to move people out of their cars onto public transport, and we need that high level of investment in public transport. And Mark is here with us today, where we've been fighting the battle to get people onto public transport, but we see a reprofiling of spend. We see the delay in purchasing new carriages where people can travel safely, and I mean safely, into work, because I spoke to a young lady 3 weeks ago that collapsed in the Dart, fainted, and she said, I lost consciousness somewhere around Blackrock, but I actually didn't fall to the floor on the Dart until Grand Canal Harbour when the pressure released. And it was great to be, the staff and the passengers all helped her and assisted her. But she says, I actually didn't hit the ground. We were packed in so tightly. And I think Mark Wall will probably tell you similar stories, and Jed Nash coming in from Drogheda. And this is why we're treating commuters. We need an urgent purchasing scheme for carriages and buses. Ciara Galvin has ran a fantastic campaign in relation to buses passing people by full in Selbridge. And like, as a politician, I'm constantly campaigning with people to use public transport. But the government has to give the commitment to purchase the infrastructure. And they're talking eloquently about EV cars and electric cars. They're talking about spending 11 billion euros over the next few years on EV cars and grant-aiding people to buy electric Mercedes and Volvos. Well, what I want to see that money is to go into good public transport in Dublin, Cork, Waterford, Limerick, and right around the country. That when we say to people that you have to move out of your car and onto public transport, they know that they're going to travel on good, safe public transport, which is just not there at the moment. And it's delay after delay after delay. When we raised the issue about purchasing the recent 41 carriages, which Minister Ross delayed for over a year, in actually just placing the order. Now, can we treat the travelling public like that any longer? I think it's totally unacceptable. And let's be honest, we have a government that's come very late to climate change. They didn't accept it. You know, they battled against it. And like many issues, Fine Gael comes very late to the party, and we only have to look at that in relation. If you look at divorce, you look at marriage equality, you look at repeal the 8. The public got there long before this government we had get there, and similar to climate change.
the Labour Party on that as well. Mark Wall, lovely to have you up here with us. You're our general election candidate in Kildare South. And again, lots of talk here about commuting. I commuted myself from Kilkenny for many years, passed through it twice every day, and a lot of squashing people into carriages, all right. What are you trying to do?
Yeah, I suppose, Mags, Kevin has hit the nail on the head here in relation to what we've been trying to do for the last 2 years. We've ran a rail and a fair deal campaign for the people of South Kildare. For the commuters, the hard-pressed commuters from Newbridge right through Kildare town into Monstrevan, Port Harrington, as you mentioned, the great town of Athy. And we've met the NTA, and we've met the NTA on a number of occasions, but this government are allowing a ridiculous situation that we have commuters who are getting into their cars, who are driving the 18 kilometres to Salon Station because it's saving them €140 a month. But they're actually driving and adding to the carbon footprint. And when we mention this to the NTA, they say, look, our hands are tied. It needs to come from the government and, of course, our good friend, Minister Ross, who's already been mentioned, who once again is asleep on this. It's been raised with him numerous times, but we need public transport. The commuters of South Kildare are tied into trains, in fairness in this, but who can blame a hard-pressed commuter? If you can save €140 per month by getting into your car and driving the 18 kilometres from Newbridge town to Salons, who can blame that person? There needs to be a change in rail fares. There needs to be more carriages, as Kevin said. It's just simply not good enough. If we're to be serious about the climate emergency that we have, then this government and Minister Ross needs to wake up urgently. The commuters of South Kildare cannot wait any longer. And Wayne Colin, I'm using this opportunity today, and thanks very much for allowing me to use this opportunity today.
There's no stopping you.
Yeah, absolutely. Why not? Because it is the number one issue. If you have 7,300 people, that's who have signed this petition in the last year and a half. These are the commuters who are angry. These are the commuters who the government are supposed to be looking after, but they're leaving them and they're not looking after them. And it's about time we had, as previous speakers have said, it's a change of government we need. But most importantly, if we're to be serious about climate change, we need to do something about rail fares and carriages, and that can't happen quick enough.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Shauna O'Ruddy, Cogarga Expression, another new councillor elected earlier this year. You're representing Skerries and Balbriggan. Similar issues?
There would be similar issues, definitely. They're both commuter towns, but in a sense, while climate change would be a priority in a general sense amongst people with whom I talk, when you drill down a little bit, they are so overwhelmed with social issues that really climate issues are something that they want to put onto the politicians to deal with and to lead on, and that is simply not happening. No. For example, in the Skerries-Balbriggan area, the people I represent, they live in the youngest, most diverse, fastest growing area in Ireland, so it's quite an interesting cohort to look at in terms of their perceptions of climate justice and climate change. And to be frank about it, between access to education, currently you have hundreds of families who cannot get provision, secondary school provision for their children. You have housing issues, as we've listened to in the previous panel, and they're trying to keep all these plates spinning. So the idea of them having the energy even to get their heads around climate justice, it's such a huge mammoth idea. They are looking to politicians. And campaigning even with Duncan Smith for the upcoming by-election, it does come up on the doors. but not in any way as frequently as all the other social issues do. So they are looking to politicians, and when they look and they see, okay, what is our government doing right now? Year on year, we're failing to hit our targets in terms of reducing our carbon emissions. We were supposed to have reduced them by 20% by next year. It now looks like they're going to be increased by 25%. So if you were to look at, you know, say health, education, transport, housing as being like a little mock exam for the government to deal with the massive issue that is climate justice and climate change, they are failing abysmally. People are very interested to engage in the ideas that I know the rugby players in New Zealand are probably hurting right now, but they have a shining light in Jacinda Ardern and what she has done there. And I think it's actually in our climate policy, the Labour climate policy, the idea of that we actually legislate the targets that have to be stuck to, because the electrical cycle does not fit responding properly and effectively to climate change. It just doesn't. You're going to be promising things. The Labour Party, more than any party, know the consequences of taking really hard decisions when you're in government, and every other party knows that, so they're not going to really want to do that, as we've seen in the recent budget. So I think that idea of actually legislating for the emission targets and just to turn our country around, and that's really what's needed. So the people of Skerries, Balbriggan and North Fingal, their energy is so spent trying to keep all the other balls in the air that they're looking to us to lead, and unfortunately the governments are not leading, and that's why they need Labour in there.
And are you heartened by the young people who are coming out from the schools tomorrow?
I am heartened, but also there's a part of me that feels very sorry for them. They have so much, like the world that I'm a teacher as well, so the world they're growing up in is so different to the world that we had in terms of stability of employment, in terms of them looking at their older brothers and sisters who are now in their late 20s, who are still living at home because they can't move out. They have lots of different anxieties going on, and while you're glad to see them taking action, you also feel this is something else being put on their shoulders, that really it's up to the people who can vote and the people who are in power who need to act.
Kevin, a Green New Deal is what we're putting forward.
Yes.
Talk to me a little bit more about it.
Well, an important part, and Chloe hit on it, is this just transition, because jobs are going to disappear. We're in the Midlands, as Chloe rightly said, and we're looking at nearly 100 jobs being lost now in the power plants. Now, we have to make sure that people get an opportunity and communities get an opportunity for retraining, to create the opportunities of the new new opportunities that will come up with the green economy. And we need to get moving on it now quickly. And I don't see any great willingness to drive forward. The people that are worst affected in relation are poorer people. It's poorer people that can't afford to retrofit their homes. So we really need now to get on, and action speaks louder than words, and we haven't seen that from this government.
Okay, and Mark, you take some of those jobs as well, wouldn't you, if you got them?
Yeah, I've been given this mic, Mag. I think someone wants to sing the chord
What
of
did
Kildare,
you
or
broke?
sing to me to sing the chord of Kildare, but maybe later on. No, in fairness to Kevin, again, where we are with the jobs. Like yesterday, we heard the announcements in relation to Shannon Bridge and Lanesborough and the people there, and that's right across the Midlands. In relation to my own area, we have Kilberry, and obviously the headquarters of Board and Mona is in Newbridge as well, and people are there worried. There's no other way of saying it. They want information, just transition. What does it mean to the person when they go home at night and they're talking about the school costs and whatever costs they have? They need information now. They cannot wait for 2030, which was originally what they were told about. It seems to be happening a lot quicker, and we need to get up to speed, and definitely the government needs to get up to speed. But just in relation to one issue, and that's the retrofitting. I see this day in, day out. We have a wonderful scheme in Kildare County Council, it's throughout, in relation to a housing aid scheme. We're replacing the windows and doors for that, particularly for older people. The difference that makes for older people in relation to their heat, etc. I've been in too many houses in rural areas, in Kildove and places like that, where you go into the houses and the windows are not there, they're falling out or whatever else. And when these people get them, these are the climate actions that can happen now. There's no other way of saying it. It's there. We have great staff in local authorities, and the particular one that I operate with, there's an actual form there. Why wait? Why wait any longer? Get it done now. Get retrofitting done. I welcome the scheme that the Labour Party are proposing.
Okay, and Niamh, just to come back to you finally for a quick response. Again, are we responding in the right way?
Well, I think the response does absolutely need to be urgent, it needs to be ambitious, and as we're hearing here, it also really needs to be just. At an international level, that means meeting targets to keep to 1.5 degrees, but also supporting the poorest countries as they try and deal with the impacts. And here in Ireland, it means we can take many initiatives in each of the different sectoral areas, but it all has to add up enough to overall reductions quick enough, fast enough, and done in a just way.
Okay, thank you again, and please thank our panellists, and we're going to pass over now again to Aoife.
Míle beachas, Mags. We have loads of tweets coming in at the minute, so before I come to my guests here, I'm going to read some of them out to you very quickly. Evan Ryan says there is a growing number of students that are locked out because of the rising costs, especially with the rise in rent. The Susie grant doesn't even cover the cost of accommodation for the majority of students. Ben Slim, whom I know well, all of our public services are in crisis. We have no homes, no healthcare and no government solutions. And Anthony O'Connor, Alan Kelly is right. Those radio ads for private hospitals really grind my gear. Anthony does not like those ads. I have Achara Ursula Nichel beside me here. Ursula, is Cushmore thought I ahu code gutche? So just transition, that's a big focus point for you. Can you tell us, on no lathwil na parte, which at the end of a no, are the parties doing their bit at the minute?
An gur míle maithagad agus cínta mar a luú hana sais téma hagan na nuasach sa ríist caithí an gníomhaocht éráide a bheith cór agus caithmuid a bheith smaoine bhar na daoine is mó a héan ahrú éráide a bhaimarthú bíochaid siúd sna tíortha tá a Ferbert nús na hairnál fuinneamh. So whether the people who are most affected, who are least to blame for climate change, shouldn't be the ones to pay for it. And it's at the heart of the Paris Agreement, the state obligations, that we need to be ensure that that those are not the people paying for it. An example, we've talked earlier about the retrofitting opportunities for Bord na Móna workers. ICTU has done incredible work on this. So it's féidir na bheith obair leis na ceard chumann na deis na sin do na fustathe. So there are great opportunities there, but we need to seize them. And I honestly think that the Labour Party is the only party that can really work to fulfil those obligations because of our history of working for decent work and for those types of opportunities. Agus maidir leis na Perthig, the peatlands, there's great opportunities there to work with farmers because farmers, have a great, they care greatly about their environment, and they could work, the peatlands are carbon sinks, so there's a great opportunity there to work with them to actually, to use the peatlands for good.
I'm going to turn very quickly to another climate activist, Jack O'Neill, who's a Labour youth activist. And Jack, you've also recently been appointed to the RT Youth Assembly on Climate. Tell us, what are the priorities for yourself and your fellow young people on this campaign?
Well, I suppose Aoife is the oilum, got ein team go more le Ursula agus on panel of Vigwin. I suppose the main priorities of the youth generation have been exhausted by the panel, and I really commend them on that for taking into account youth issues and concerns regarding the impending climate crisis. But I think it really all boils down to this idea of, as it's been mentioned, the just transition and economic inequalities. And I think the idea of the least amount of blame being put on the people most affected is something quite close to my own heart. I'm only back off an aid mission from East Africa, from Tanzania, on which I worked on a plantation that governs the safeguarding of environmental spaces within the urban city of Arusha. But even on an Irish basis, economic inequality and the just transition, it affects everyone. It affects farmers who need to ensure that food production doesn't become in decline. It affects workers. It affects, as we've seen in Bord na Móna, and ESB, up to 80 people might be losing their jobs in this very region due to the issues surrounding bog rehabilitation and the lack of employment framework in place for people in those sectors. And it even, it mostly affects the youth, because the youth will have to pick up the pieces for this.
And we know, Jack, that there's amazing work being done by these coalitions and the movement that is being led by young people, and how they're working with the trade union movement as well to include the just transition within the campaign values. I'm going to go very quickly here to Councillor Juliette O'Connell. Can these environmental policies, can they have an impact on local towns and the local economy of local towns?
Aoife, I absolutely think so. Micro-enterprises at the moment are too small to have an environmental impact compared to the larger companies. So we have no choice. We have to support environmental policies such as cycling. At the moment, there isn't too many cyclists to have an impact on the local economy, but the exciting mass cycling movement that hopefully will happen will certainly have a huge impact in the local economy, for sure.
And tell me, how can cycling have an impact on a small town, maybe such as Dunleary, your own area?
Sometimes I think the solutions are staring us in the face. And the limitations that we have in Dunleary is with lack of footfall, for example. So that cycling solutions could provide for access, less congestion. It could provide a problem for lack of parking spaces. And even the social aspect of mass cycling alone will allow people to, well, it will encourage people to use their local town more than they are now.
They might be able to get into their local town a little bit easier.
Exactly.
Julia, thank you so much. I'm going to just go back over to Mags now.
Thanks very much, and wonderful to hear you all speaking on Scéalga Freisin. We're going to come to our last topic, as you heard mentioned earlier. We are going to talk to our panelists about direct provision, but to introduce us, dressed wonderfully in Kilkenny colours, thank you very much. Just for me, delegates, welcome Annie Waithra-Burke.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and media, I want to take again this opportunity to welcome you all here today and to say thank you for gracing us with your presence. Our discussions in this topic, as Mags has said, is direct provision, citizenship, and online harassment. In the last year, I have been privileged to work and be involved with amazing organizations such as Akidwa, Wazesha, Immigrant Council of Ireland, who have given me the vast knowledge of Irish history, culture, community, and the political system. Although it has been heartbreaking to watch and hear stories of communities campaigning for one of their own not to be forcefully removed and deported, I do find it highly hypocritical for our own government to have an envoy seeking for the rights of undocumented Irish in places like the United States. Yet we have families here who are living in fear of being torn apart and sometimes being taken away from the only life that they know. It is also highly inhumane to have systems like direct provision. We do have vulnerable people coming to seek asylum, but yet we put them in horrible states of limbo for years. It is high time we have an amnesty for those who have been here for more than 2 years, including undocumented migrants. The Labour Party calls for a much-needed reform to this system. This year was one of my proudest moments. I was a contestant in the local elections, but much to my dismay, I did not expect the amount of abuse that I got from sexism comments, racism, full-blown online bullying. I believe it is high time our laws caught up with the internet and social media, mainly information technology in general. Despite the ignorance and fear and hateful things I have experienced, I will continue to work with policymakers and be part of the decision-making process to ensure real change is made in relation to any of these topics. Thank you.
Annie, again, thank you so much for sharing your experience, your stories, and how wonderful to see you here at conference and with your two beautiful children today. Salome Bugwa, founder of Akidwa, which was already mentioned. You're a gender equality activist, you're a human rights advocate. I mean, I could talk for 20 minutes about just the things that you've done, but have we gotten anything right in this country? Sometimes when we look at the reports and hear reports, it can be very disheartening for those of us who are welcoming.
Thank you so much. And I would like first to thank Reba for giving us the opportunity to speak, but also for choosing the theme for this conference, which is actually equal society, something as a migrant myself who have been here for the last 25 years that I've been talking about and would want us to discuss as a community. Just to say that actually the Ireland of 21st century will be judged by how it treated its people in this 21st century. And it's a high time that the Labour take this opportunity to bring these changes that are needed, meaningful changes that make everybody to feel equal and part and parcel of an Irish society. Just to say that we are very far away from achieving equality. And we will talk about, for example, direct provision. We are far from getting it right. People here maybe don't understand the reality of people living in direct provision. And actually, the actual reality of mental health and psychological impact on children in particular that continue to impact on these people. We have over 1,600 people who are living in direct provision for more than 3 years. We heard from Dunne, actually, who have lived in direct provision for 5 years herself. And these continue to impact on people's lives. And they can't actually, even when we have the right to work, for example, which we could proud ourselves that we have, this is also a restricted right. We also have people who came here before, they've been here in the country for 4 years, 3 years, and still they cannot work. So that right was restrictive, and it cannot actually match their needs. So we are far away from achieving the rights of people when we talk about direct provision. And of course, we've heard about these outrageous issues of racism and discrimination that people from direct provision continue to get. So we need to work together as a society, as an Irish society that meaningfully want to tackle issues of racism and discrimination and making our society a society that treats people with dignity and respect, regardless of where they are coming from. So direct provision has to be handled in a manner that actually realizes the rights of people and human rights of people, and this needs to be done as a matter of urgency.
Yeah, it's not about rights, it's absolutely about human rights. Pippa Wilno, Immigrant Council of Ireland. I mean, you must be experiencing the same level of frustration that Salome has. And I know you've had urgent calls and different reports. Is there any progress being made?
Yeah, so I mean, direct provision obviously is very much front and centre at the moment, as it should be, because it is such a serious issue, and it is something that we are failing on. The state is failing, local communities are being failed, and most importantly, those arriving in Ireland seeking support, seeking sanctuary are being failed. But immigration is about much more than that. Ireland is an incredibly diverse society now. 1 in 8 of us are from a migrant background, and there are many problems with the system. And we had a judge just this week describing the Department of Justice section that deals with immigration as Napoleon from Animal Farm, in terms of a woman who was trying to regularize her status. She had fallen out of status, and she was tried to be honest, and was rejected by the immigration system, and then was rejected on appeal. And as the Justice said, what then in this regime, and he called it a regime, would persuade anyone to be honest? And we need to recognise, I mean, Ireland, like everywhere, is a globalised society. People are moving much more. They're coming here for jobs. They're coming here for reuniting with families. There's many systems. And the big issue is the level of discretion. We don't have a strong enough immigration framework. And people call the helpline at the Immigrant Council and say, you know, just tell us what we can do, and we'd like to do it. But we have about 80% discretion and 20% legislative and policy framework. That puts a huge administrative burden on the state, and also leaves a lot of people, we have people calling us in very similar positions being given different decisions. So we need to make sure that it's the other way around. 80% policy and framework, so people know if they come here on a specific work permit or a visa, what they need to do to reapply or to move towards citizenship, which is obviously the goal. So that's the type of recommendations that we've been making.
I also want to congratulate you and your colleagues on the level of political activation that you have worked with migrants around the country, encouraging them to get involved in politics. So thank you for that, because that's how Annie and us met, and many other around the country. So you'll keep that up.
Oh, that's absolutely so important, because a really big piece about equality is integration and inclusion, and political participation is such an important part of feeling belonging and how you belong. So I'll be talking later at the about
one of the fringe events.
Yeah.
Councillor Thomas Phelan, congratulations, newly elected in Dungarvan. And I know earlier in the year, myself and Sheila Noonan visited with Syrian refugees in Dungarvan. It seems to me that your community is very welcoming and has worked out how to live together.
Yeah, I think we could be the model of how to do this. I mean, the refugee orientation centre near me isn't the traditional direct provision model. People come in, it's their first introduction to Ireland, help them acclimatise, and no better introduction to Ireland than the sunny southeast. And as I say, they've been made very welcome. There's an awful lot that Waterford and Dungarvan can be proud of. We've got the Greenway, we've got great food, great scenery, and I think we can be also very proud of the welcome we've given to the Syrians and other people who've come into our country, and that's something that I think the whole country could be proud of as well, if we were to really embrace the opportunity to show that Ireland is a welcoming society and would embrace what people can bring to our economy and to our society.
And Annie, also two newly elected councillors, different ends of the country, Bettystown and Laytown. And of course, a lot of talk is around Mosney as a centre. So you have visited there quite a number of times. Give me and give our people here an experience of visiting.
So Mosney is in my local electoral area, and I've spent a lot of time there, and I've got great friends there. And I suppose when I go into Mosney and I talk to people there, the number one thing that everyone always says to me is, we just want to start our lives.
Yeah.
We just want to start our lives. We want to be able to begin living. So if you can imagine, one of my friends in Mosney has been there for 11 years. Can you imagine waiting 11 years to start your life? That's not a system. Our system isn't working. They're like, and we do need some help to be able to start our lives. We want to step out of here. We want to be able to contribute. We want to open businesses. There's so much enthusiasm, creativity, experiences that these wonderful people in Mosney want to bring to Irish society. And this waiting to start your life, their children not being sure what's going to happen. Every single week, Senator Jed Nash and I deal with people who are being faced with deportation orders. Imagine waiting years and years of your life to then be told, no, this is the only life that their children know. They've gone to school here, they've been raised here, they've studied here, they've made friends here, they've made family, their family is here. There's a student in DCU who's been given a deportation order. Imagine welcoming someone into our education system, bringing someone through the system. She's early years education. She's going to an extraordinary contribution that she's going to bring to Irish society, and now is being told, hop it. Yeah. Like that is an inhumane system, and that is not how anyone should be living. And that is that. So when I walk into Mosney and I talk to people and my friends in there, the number one thing is we just want to start. And I'm sure anyone we just want to start living our lives. And we're extraordinarily grateful. They're saying, we've been given opportunity, we've been given help here. We're glad we have made our friends and family here. But we want to begin and take ourselves out of this system. We don't want to be in this system. We don't want to be a burden on anyone. We want to begin living, and that is really the number one thing that I hear.
And Salome, tied in with this then is also what you touched on, racism, but the level of online bullying and harassment that must be experienced. We've heard it from Annie. You've probably had experience of it with people that you deal with as well.
Absolutely, and including actually myself, it's everywhere. It's within the social media. It's actually on the website. It's on the Twitter. It's in everything. Just actually this week I spoke in a conference, with one of the organizations which is preparing for the Nairobi Summit, talking about population. And I was talking about Ireland as my country. I don't talk about Kenya because I've left Kenya 25 years ago. And I'm told, go back to your country. I want to do the best for my country. This is my country. But you actually keep on being pushed and attacked every time. It's like, you're not supposed to be here. You better not even talk about anything here. But so many people are investing in this country to do the best and to do the good. But all people see is like, you are different. You're not supposed to be here. Your country of origin, you have not sorted it out. I'm here to sort here out, not there. And so it's actually... It's a high time that all of you, all of us, give each and everyone an opportunity to be able to build that inclusive society that we want, that the Ireland that we want to leave behind when we are gone, that everybody will be proud of. So the whole issue of online bullying, hate crime is huge, and we need a law and legal framework that will protect people from this. The Incitement to Hatred Act of 1989 is outdated, and the government needs to do something to ensure that its people are protected fully from these attacks of hate and crime as well.
Thank you. And Annie, we're very quickly coming to the end of these panels. Unfortunately yourself, you've experienced online bullying as well.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm only newly elected. I've only been a couple of weeks almost in the job, and I don't experience the bullying that other female politicians have, but that is an appalling sentence to say, that I've not experienced it the way that it is coming down the line for me. Like, that is not something I'm looking forward to. People will take screenshots of things that I put up and will message me about them, will comment on my weight. will, you know, if I put up, I share me as a person. I believe people voted for Annie as a person, not just my policies. And I very much share myself online, having ice cream with my dad on the beach. And people are like, how dare you have ice cream on the beach when there are people, you know, something, something, something. I'm like, I don't know that me and my dad going for a walk are going to be able to affect that. And this really targeted, if you break for a second, if you don't seem like you're constantly, relentlessly working or doing something, people will find that chink and they will take screenshots, they will send you messages, they will tell you you're not good enough. But it's not just online. And I am not the only person in the room who experiences that, and I experience it very mildly, but that is not acceptable, that I am bolstering myself up for a life of this. And we see over in the UK where there is now a decline, particularly in women politicians and diverse politicians, because the abuse and the attack is getting so much, and you're just told to buckle up and that's life. And I refuse to accept that this is my life. I refuse to accept that I'm going to be bullied.
So speaking of life, and the slice of life that we have shown you all here today, I really do hope that you go home to your constituencies, to your branch meetings, that you discuss the issues that we've been talking about here further, that you continue to be active and talk about policy and put pressure on, not me, the other people in this room who are the policy makers, and to make sure that we can deliver for these people and making Ireland a more equal society. And before I finish, I just want to say a few thank yous. All of the contributors here today have been wonderful. They have been working hard, preparing, and even came down last night to make sure that I wouldn't be pulling my hair out, which you can see is held together by concrete. Ifani Hulawan, thank you so much for your wonderful contributions there and all the hard work that you have done. The team behind us all, Billy Sparks, Aideen Blackwood, John O'Carroll, Conor Sheehan, Carol Hayden, the conference team, everybody who has to work on makeup, hair, miking everybody up for this 2-hour slot. It has been a huge team. To our press office as well, to Siobhan, Claire, Cathal, Dara, and our online activists who have supported you throughout today. Thank you so much. There's a lot left in conference today for you. There's a brochure going around. There might be one change to the campaigns unit time, but other than that, go forward and have a wonderful conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much.